Hey everybody, happy Thursday and welcome to another Techstrong TV broadcast. Today is Thursday, February 10th. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon and we have a great show on tap for you today. We're going to get things kicked off with a conversation between Alan and Steve Hendrick, who is the VP of Research over at the Linux Foundation. And the Linux Foundation recently released the State of Software Bill of Materials and Cybersecurity Readiness Research Report. It takes a look at the extent of organizational SBOM, or Software Bill of Materials, readiness and adoption tied to cybersecurity efforts. And this is a very relevant conversation, especially in light of all of the software supply chain attacks that we've been hearing about for the last year or so, probably longer than that. But this is a great conversation. I encourage you to check it out. After that, we have another conversation with Alan. This one is with William Morgan. He's the CEO and co-founder over at Buoyant. They discuss the state of service mesh in 2022 and some of the key trends that are going to impact the cloud native stack, including the lack of educational opportunities around Kubernetes. This is a fascinating discussion, and it really does get to the heart of what a lot of organizations are dealing with when it comes to their developers and their engineers just really understanding the Kubernetes landscape and how to operationalize Kubernetes. Hopefully things are getting better, but right now we are kind of off on a rocky start with Kubernetes. So this is a great conversation and very insightful. After that, we have episode 2 of our Techstrong Women series that I host along with Tracy Bannon from MITRE. This is a great conversation we recently had with Lisa Pluggemeyer, who is the executive director of the National Cybersecurity Alliance. You may remember that on a Tuesday show, I actually had an interview with Lisa about the state of cybersecurity. Well, this time the three of us talk about so many different things related to not just being a female in IT. We don't really want to pigeonhole it that way, but we talk about some of the issues that folks in general face in IT. And this time it really focuses on communication, as well as that ever-present imposter syndrome that both males and females do deal with. And then also some of the other things include the importance of mentoring and just so many other different topics. It is a great conversation. Definitely does provide a window into the way men and women work differently. So I highly encourage you to check that one out as well. After that, we have our Something Old segment. This is from the recent DevOps Connect DevSecOps at RSAC 2021 virtual event. This was the keynote panel, and it is called a VC's look at what the new normal means for DevSecOps. This one is hosted by Alan Schimmel, and it includes Andy Ellis, who is the former CSO of Akamai, now with YL Ventures, Thomas Crane, who's a principal over at Insight Ventures, Shenxi Wang, who is with Rain Capital, Venture Capitals as well, and Cindy Gula, who's a managing partner at Gula Tech Adventures. They discuss what they're seeing and what they expect to see coming over the horizon as it pertains to cybersecurity and cybersecurity funding. So good stuff there. All right, after that, I'm back with the news headlines, and then I have a great conversation, another conversation with Kevin McCaffrey, who is the CEO and founder of Trident, and he was with me a couple months ago. We had a really great conversation about digital transformation. Well, he, in his adventures, has experienced the rise of the digital transformation office within many enterprises, and so we discussed the growing influence and prominence of digital transformation offices and how that might actually influence a lot of the technology buying decisions within an organization. Good stuff there. After that, I've got the webinar's preview, and then we have the View with Vizard. In this one, Mike Vizard speaks with Catalogic Software COO Satya Sankaran, and they discuss why backup and recovery in Kubernetes environments is so different. A lot to think about with that topic, and definitely a lot of takeaways in that conversation. And that is today's lineup, and it's a good one, folks. I hope you can stick around for the entirety. We're going to get things kicked off right after these commercial messages.
CISO Talk, to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond, CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and MediaOps CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and techstrong.tv.
All right, we are back. Kicking off today's conversations is one between Alan and Steve Hendrick, who's the VP of Research over at the Linux Foundation. And they discuss the Linux Foundation's State of Software Bill of Materials and Cybersecurity Readiness Research Report. Takes a look at the extent of organizational SBOM readiness and adoption tied to cybersecurity efforts. Great conversation. It's a great report, totally worth checking out. Hope you can. But for now, let's take a look at this conversation.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, welcome to another Techstrong TV interview. I'm really happy to introduce you to Steve Hendrick. Steve is the VP of Research over at the Linux Foundation, and we're really happy to have him on today. Hey Steve, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks for asking, Alan.
Thank you. Steve, look, the Linux Foundation is doing so many great things across such a wide range of topics, whether we're talking about software and automobiles, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, CDF Foundation, Open Mainframe Project, the Open Source Security Foundation. I mean, who would have thought, whatever it was, it had to be 25 years ago now, maybe, I know you guys recently had a big gala celebrating an anniversary, how far-reaching that Linux Foundation would be. And it is, and kudos. The education, everything. The research arm of LF is one that, maybe not a lot of people are familiar with. So before we jump into this great report that you guys just have out on software builder material, I wanted to talk a little bit about just the Linux Foundation's research division.
Sure.
And you're the VP there. Tell our audience, what are you guys up to? What's the mission there?
Well, this is a new group. This was put in place and staffed up starting spring of last year. So there's two of us. I'm sort of the research VP in charge of heavy lifting, and Hillary Carter is a research VP as well, and she's more on the biz dev side. And relationship side. So, and the reason I'm doing the heavy lifting is that I have come out of the industry analyst space was doing that gig for 30 years. The first 22 were with IDC and then some boutiques after that. And so I've had the opportunity to publish about 1,000 research documents. I've been involved driving over 100 surveys. And so I think what happened was Linux Foundation wanted a seasoned professional could come in and do top quality research. And so that was their interest in me. So we put this research engine in place at Linux Foundation. And the first core project out of the gate was this SBOM research. And what's really interesting is that in my 30 years as an industry analyst, and I was the lead on application development and deployment, I never once heard the term SBOM. And so I was kind of caught me by surprise when, here I am going to be the principal investigator on this and researching SBOMs and trying to find out what's going on in that space. So I, of course, enlisted a lot of experts to help me figure out what kind of questions to ask, although I had a whole bunch in my pocket that I thought were important. And so that was the genesis of the research.
Absolutely. And, well, first of all, congratulations on spinning this up over there. I think it's a natural fit for this, kind of increased scope of the Linux Foundation. I learned this lesson, Stephen, when I was at Still Secure, and we sold a lot of security stuff to the U.S. government. The acronyms when you're in it, you take them for granted, right? Yeah, SBOM.
Sure.
Other people listening to this, right, especially my non-security or maybe non-developer team, saying SBOM, and they think, are we cursing? Are we terrorists? What the heck is an SBOM? And I think we should start there, right? Software Bill of Materials, SBOM, hence SBOM. And I don't know if many of our audience ever heard the term SBOM prior to maybe a year ago now, when we saw a spate of the first kind of really big public software supply chain attacks, right? SolarWinds was one.
Yep.
We saw others. And then, of course, there was an executive order out of the White House calling for a software bill of materials on all software. There was recently an open source kind of security summit over in Washington. And again, SBOM was a prominent topic of discussion.
That's right.
So it is, no, we're not making up another crazy name for you folks to learn. It really has become a very, very timely, important idea of how we can help secure things.
That's right.
Right? When you live in a world where 85% or 75% of the software code in any given application is third-party, usually open source components then glued together, right? Knowing what those components are is oftentimes the threshold question to knowing how to secure it and what you got. And so, I don't want to diminish or for a second, it is real important stuff, right? I don't care what you call it.
Yep.
Anyway, I've said my piece, Stephen. Now it's up to you. Tell us about the survey.
Okay. Well, first, let me just give you a quick rundown on what an SBOM is, because if you've got listeners who are not familiar with the term, then it's really good for me to put this in place. I'm going to go through real fast, though, because I want to get to the findings of the survey. So what an SBOM is it essentially provides information about the software component. And SBOMs, actually, the genesis of SBOMs was like 10 years ago. And it was very much focused on information. What license is in place for the component, what are the dependencies for the component, and a lot of information, a lot more metadata about what's going on with the component itself. So that started about 10 years ago. About 5 years ago, there was a transition that started because security began to get more and more important. And so what has happened is there's been a shift in the last couple of years to adding on to what an SBOM is, so that we can essentially talk more about security issues and identify vulnerabilities and add information like hash totals so that you can do reproducible builds of the component. So a lot of information to be able to help lock down the component and also identify through links out to the national registries vulnerabilities. What current and emerging vulnerabilities the component has. Because that's the kind of information necessary so you can make an educated decision about, do I want to rely on this component from the standpoint of the software that I'm building. And Alan, you're exactly right. 98% of the organizations that were in our survey use open source software, and 95% of them were concerned about software security. So yes, SBOMs are not a solution to the security problem, but they are a great enabler to being able to help solve security problems. So let me just kind of run down what's in an SBOM. You've got a software identifier, you have identification of software dependencies, you've got license information, you have a link to known vulnerabilities, because that can be potentially a kind of a complex, that's an ever-changing complex list. So you don't want to package that in the SBOM, but you do want a link so you can go out and at any time either push, pull find out what those vulnerabilities are. You've got a hashtag that will allow you to verify the integrity of the component. The information in SBOM is machine readable and generatable. And it really provides organizations with a good way to understand risk and mitigate risk when it comes to the open source components that they use, and ultimately the closed source ones as well. Okay, so that's kind of a rundown of what's in an SBOM. Now, from the standpoint of the research that we did, I got together with a lot of experts, and of course, we've got quite a few inside the Linux Foundation. And so we put our heads together to build the survey instrument, and we went out into the field August of last year. So we were a couple months behind the executive order, and I think that was useful to some extent. And let's see, when we surveyed organizations, 80% of them, actually 79%, were end user organizations and 21 were vendors. So I wanted a smattering of vendors in there because I thought the vendor perspectives may be a little different than end users. The worldwide survey, 45% America, 40% EMEA, 15% AP. And the source came from a panel provider that I have used a lot and very trustworthy in the IT space, as well as the Linux Foundation community. I was very nervous being new to the Linux Foundation about the integrity of the community, so I did significance testing against the Linux Foundation sample versus the sample I got from a third party. And oddly enough, because I thought maybe there would be, a bias, a pro SBOM bias built into the Linux Foundation community. What happened was just the opposite. We found that in the third panel, senior IT guys at organizations in that view of the world, they were actually more bigots for SBOMs than the Linux Foundation community. Really? That was just remarkable. So I was kind of glad to see that in some ways. I mean, I think ultimately, at the end of the day, I'd like there to be no significant difference between the samples, but I'll take this one as a win. And because of the stronger emphasis of the panel on SBOMs, that means that the data that I'm going to be talking about is actually somewhat more conservative in its orientation because it's being pulled down by what the Linux Foundation, a community member, said. Okay, so that's what we did. We published this survey just yesterday. And if you want to, the results, the report I wrote, the 72-page report is on the Linux Foundation site. If you just go to the homepage on Linux Foundation, you can click on the press release. And in that press release, there was a link to where you find the survey on the site. I mean, not survey, the report.
Yes. There were the results and analysis, yeah.
That's right. Yeah, it was a sort of long-winded, but there's a lot of good data in there, and I'm sure it'll be really interesting to a lot of people.
Absolutely.
So let me talk about just some of the important findings. I think this is probably what we want to spend the rest of the time on. And then we can decide, once I've given you the important findings, we can figure out where to go from there. So, as I mentioned, I didn't know anything about SBOMs before I showed up at Linux Foundation, although I understood, DevOps and DevSecOps. And so one of the things I wanted to do is I wanted in a very structured way to understand what is the adoption of SBOMs, because I was very concerned that very little was going on out there in the industry. I mean, none of the vendors were talking about it, seemingly, at least not back in the sort of the era of when I was designing the survey instrument. So, there's software, SCA vendors, the software composition analysis guys probably came the closest. I know those guys have been working on this for a while, although I still hadn't heard much about SBOM terminology. So I wanted to find out what kind of penetration is going on, what's the adoption, what's happening out there. What's really remarkable is that, so I have a series of questions that I asked on both the production and consumption side of SBOMs. Because, if you're a vendor, you're going to be producing them because they're going to have to go along with the commercial software you're selling. If you're an end user, you're more likely to be consuming them and wanting to be able to understand dependencies and vulnerabilities so you can make the right decisions about how to use the potential components. So what we found was that 47% of organizations today are producing and or consuming SBOMs.
Wow. That's much higher than I would think.
Well, I mean, when I say they're producing or consuming, they can be producing, sort of a few business units can be producing, or some, or many, or nearly all.
Still better than I thought, Stephen.
Well, that's right. And what was really interesting was that, breaking down that 47%, we had 14% that were producing SBOMs across nearly all of their business segments, and 7% that had basically built SBOMs in as a standard practice. So they're doing it all the time. So that's a total of 21%. So 40% of that 47% are deeply into SBOMs. That was a mind-blowing realization.
Yeah. I'd like to, do you know how long they've been doing that?
I don't know how long. No, I can't answer that question.
Okay.
But what's also is really interesting is that, beyond the 47%, what's going on? We had 40% who said we plan to do SBOMs in the next 6 to 24 months. And so, I broke that down in a very detailed way. I had the next 6 months, the next 18, or the next 24. And so I was able to understand what the adoption was going to be of SBOMs in 2022 and 2023. So I could back into growth rates and, ultimate forecast penetration rates. So what that all means is that we've got 47% using SBOMs in some capacity of organizations. There's going to be up to 66% growth in 2022 in this quote unquote SBOM market of organizations wanting to jump on board and begin doing SBOMs. And that's going to drive the penetration from 47% up to 78%. And then in 2023, we're going to have significantly less growth because penetration is already pretty high. We'll have 13% growth in 2023, and that will increase penetration from 78 to 88%, which is a very high number. But considering what the executive order said, which is that if you want to provide software to the federal government, it's going to have an SBOM that comes along with it. So you can see why many organizations, be they vendors or end users, are very interested in getting on the bus here.
Excellent.
Yeah, that was just remarkable.
Mm-hmm.
Now from here, Alan, we have a couple of choices. We can talk about, go a little bit beyond the boundary of SBOMs and talk about, important activities for securing the supply chain. We can talk about SBOM benefits. We can talk about concerns. We can talk about sort of what organizations need to know to be able to move forward with all this. You got a particular topic you want to pick?
So, Stephen, here's the conundrum. These are 15-minute interviews, and we're at about 18. And I have a panel that I need to record at the top of the hour.
Okay.
So here's what I'd like to do is, number one, let's get people over to the site to download the report itself. And then what I'd like to do, Stephen, is let's schedule a part 2 of this.
Okay.
And we won't do any of this preliminary stuff that we waste. Right. We didn't waste, but we took half our interview on, and we'll jump into that. How does that sound?
That sounds like a great idea.
All right. Remind people again, where can they go get this report?
Go to the Linux Foundation site.
And that's linux.org, right? Or is it linuxfoundation.org?
linuxfoundation.org.
Right.
Just put in Linux Foundation. There's only one. And on the homepage, there's a press release. Inside that press release, about halfway down, is a link where you can actually go to download the document. You don't have to put in your name or any of that. Just you go to the landing page, pull it down, and have fun doing some reading.
Excellent. Steve, thanks so much for coming on. We'll get you scheduled for a part 2 on this, so stay tuned. And keep up the great work. It's a great start to the Linux Foundation research team, and looking forward to big things.
Okay. Hey, thanks so much, Alan.
Thank you. Steve Hendricks, Linux Foundation Research here on Techstrong TV. We're going to take a break, and we'll be right back.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more.
All right, we are back. Next up, Alan speaks with William Morgan, who is the CEO and co-founder at Buoyant. They discuss the service mesh landscape, the state of service mesh in 2022, and some of the key trends that are impacting the cloud native stack, one of which is the lack of educational opportunities around Kubernetes. That's a really fascinating discussion. Let's go ahead and roll it now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, Alan Schimmel here on another Techstrong TV. My guest is my friend William Morgan. William, of course, is the CEO of it's Buoyant, right? Is
That's
that how you
right.
pronounce it?
Yep.
And Buoyant, of course, the originators, maintainers, whatever you want, of the Linkerd Mesh, which is a cloud native computing foundation project. Hey William, welcome back to Techstrong TV. It's good to see you, my friend.
Thanks for having me, Alan. It's great to be back.
Yep. So, William, I gave a quick background, but why don't you jump into a little bit of the Buoyant story, if you don't mind?
Yeah, absolutely. So Buoyant, as you mentioned, is a creator of a service mesh project called Linkerd, which is now the only graduated tier service mesh project in the CNCF. So I'm very happy about that. It's the highest level of project maturity recognized. And it's used by organizations around the world to power their Kubernetes applications.
Absolutely. And, William, look, I felt like during 2021, we would be hearing a lot about service mesh, right? Unfortunately, earlier 2021, 2020, there was a lot of, let's call it controversy with service mesh with our friends at Google and all that stuff. But in my mind, service mesh was a catalyst for greater Kubernetes adoption, right? Because what happens is once you get to a certain level of complexity in your Kubernetes infrastructure, service mesh becomes not a nice to have, but a must have.
That's right.
To keep everything happening.
Yeah, that's right. And that's certainly a big shift that we've seen. A few years ago, we were still making that argument. We were saying, hey, look, if you're going to run Kubernetes, it doesn't give you a good way to have observability. It doesn't give you any kind of reliability semantics. It doesn't give you any encryption or any, kind of traffic security, and you need a service mesh. Now, fast forward a couple of years, everyone kind of believes that, and we have a different sort of conversation, an easier conversation usually.
Well, look, it's always as an entrepreneur, multiple, serial entrepreneur in software services, it's always an easier conversation if you have a must-have versus a nice-to-have. Right? It's hard selling nice-to-haves.
Right.
You want to have a must-have. But that being said, even though it's a must-have, there's still questions. There's still not doubts, but it's at this place where sort of best practices are not codified, if you will. They're emerging.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
So I think 2022 is a big year for this, right? Where we'll see some of this kind of shake out.
Well, one thing I've definitely noticed in the cloud native world is that there are hype cycles, that are very strong. It seems like everyone's talking about a technology, and those have to almost die down before the adoption catches up to them. So there was a massive hype cycle around service mesh 2019, 2020, and that hype is slowly moving on to other topics. And what we're seeing is adoption is actually going up in a really significant way. So there's this disconnect. There's like this 2-year disconnect between, what everyone's talking about and then what everyone's actually doing.
William, hype cycles are not just cloud native. That the old Gartner hype cycle has been around for as long as I've been in tech, and it's an interesting thing that we see this. But I think, especially in the cloud native space and around the service mesh Kubernetes area, we probably did suffer from a big part of that, the overhype, if you will, and then into what they call the trough of disillusionment to it, right? And then coming back out to usability. Right. I think we went through the overhype. I think we went through the trough in 2020 to 2021 early, and now back out the other side into usability.
That's certainly what it feels like from our perspective. And I think the service mesh had it particularly bad because, you mentioned our friends at Google. I think there were a lot of promises made about the magic of this infrastructure, as a silver bullet, and the word got a little tainted, got associated with complexity, and we've been doing our best to remove that association, making Linkerd as simple and as lightweight and as human friendly as possible. But it takes time to recover.
Yeah, it does. But also it's again inherent in our tech world. I'm guilty. My friends are guilty. We tend to be like ADD with shiny trinket syndrome, right? Where everyone always wants to latch on to the next cool thing, and the next cool thing is going to be that magic bullet or genie's lamp that we would have been looking for. That's going to solve the world's problems. It don't work like that, right? Things. They build on each other. They all have good stuff, and then all of a sudden you find out, well, it only does 70% of what I thought it was going to do. It's a failure, right? This isn't what I thought, and that again, that's part of that hype cycle thing. But I think, as I said, we're moving past that, William. Let's look at what does 2022 look like in the world of service mesh. You think?
Yeah, so the hype has died down, which is nice. Everyone's off talking about other things now, talking about eBPF or WASM or whatever the flavor of the day is. And certainly what we've seen on the Buoyant side, because we track not just open source usage, we track enterprise usage. We track folks who are trying to build serious business functions on top of the service mesh. We've seen a massive uptick over the past 6 months, just kind of astonishing. And the difference has been folks who are coming in now care less about the details of the technology. They care less about, they're not as enthusiastic about the way it works and the nuts and bolts. They recognize it's a critical part of the infrastructure, and they're just trying to build on top of it, right? And they're just, they're trying to get it in place so that they can go back to doing their real job, which is, powering the economic engine of their business. And usually that doesn't involve becoming a service mesh expert. So that's been great. And I expect to see a lot more of that. And almost everything we've been doing at Buoyant has been in service of that over the past year or two, in service of making it so that the service mesh can be an implementation detail that it's a spark plug or the the controlling wires or whatever analogy you want to use. You're driving the car, you're going to assume that stuff works. Right, because that's not really, you're not a mechanic. You're just trying to get from one destination, get to your destination.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that goes to, in this world of digital transformation, this magical digital transformation world we live in, right? So many companies want to digitally transform their businesses, but they don't want to really be in the nuts and bolts, the weeds of like being the mechanic of digital transformation. They just want to leverage digital transformation.
Right. That's right. And I think another consequence of kind of the hype cycle is that getting actual, strong technical content is difficult. It's difficult to find that because there's so much marketing involved. So finally, earlier this year, we launched the Buoyant Service Mesh Academy. It's all free. It's all, online, and it's all available to anyone who wants to join. But our goal was, let's give you some really serious technical content about the service mesh both from the operation. Yes, there's some under the hood stuff, but also from the operational perspective, from the implementer's perspective, from the adopter's perspective. And let's just put that out there so that people have a place to go to, where they can learn stuff without the kind of marketing, influence in there. And that's been wildly successful. We've only had a couple workshops, but we're attracting hundreds of attendees for each one and getting great feedback and great questions. So it's been encouraging, how well that's been working.
Absolutely. So, William, out of the many, many things that Service Mesh helps with Kubernetes at scale, what do you think are let's say the top 3 things that people are using Service Mesh for right now?
Yeah, it's funny because we've been in this game for a long time, I think longer than anyone else, which means we started in 2015, back in the olden days.
All the way back.
Right. And our original vision was that, or our original guess was that people were really going to be concerned about the reliability features, because that was kind of our background. Oliver Gould and I, both the two kind of original creators of Linkerd, came out of Twitter, and we're very reliability focused. There's the fail whale and all that stuff. And actually, the number one driver of Linkerd adoption is not the reliability features; it's actually the security features. So, and I think that's for a couple of reasons. But we did a survey recently of KubeCon attendees, so kind of the the leading edge of service mesh adoption. And number one reason why anyone was adopting Linkerd was for mutual TLS, so they could get encryption and identity and authenticity for all their communication on the Kubernetes cluster. And that's actually been a message we've been hearing, pretty consistently for the past couple of years. So I'd say if I had to pick one instead of 3, if I had to pick one, it's definitely security.
It's interesting. I mean, look, security seems to be number 1 on everyone's list this year, not just in Service Mesh, right? We're getting serious about security. Let's talk about, how does Service Mesh actually help with security, William?
Yeah, so there's one, security is a broad topic, and there's a lot of stuff that the Service Mesh cannot do, right? And any good security strategy involves multiple layers of things. But the one thing that a Service Mesh can do really, really well is it can give you traffic security between your applications that are running on the mesh. And by traffic security, I mean confidentiality. So anyone who sneaks into there and can listen on the network doesn't get to hear anything that they're not supposed to hear, right? So that's basically encryption. You get some other nice properties around things like message integrity and things like that. But actually, the number one thing that you get is identity. So you get the ability to know when A is talking to B, both sides can validate that you are actually A and you are actually B, and you can do that in a way that doesn't have to trust the network, doesn't have to trust the hosts, doesn't have to trust really anything. So for any modern organization that's really serious about implementing security in a zero trust way, Linkerd gives you this wonderful mechanism for doing that with very little effort on your part. And we put a lot of time and energy into making it so it's actually on by default. So the moment you install Linkerd, all communication between your mesh pods is fully mutual TLS. And we're doing all the hard stuff around certificate rotation. There's a lot of machinery under the hood, but we make it really, really easy for you to have secure communication between your applications on Kubernetes in a totally zero trust way. And that's what I think has been the foundation of kind of modern network security in the cloud native world.
Sure. So William, I've been in the security world for 25 years. That's my background, right?
Right.
Security. And it's funny, security is a big domain, no pun intended. But there's many aspects of security. 2022, cloud native, identity and access control, right? That is in a place where we don't have the perimeter, the moat and castle anymore. Right. Identity and access control becomes paramount.
Yep.
Right. I mean, there's AppSec and there's other API security is an important thing. That's part of Service Mesh too. But certainly, identity and access control is. I mean, it makes the world go round. The cloud native world, anyway, right? We can't. Without that sort of trust, without that security, it's very hard to function.
Yeah.
And I
that's
guess
right.
that's part of that must-have versus nice-to-have, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the change that's happening is as people adopt, as they move more into the cloud, as they adopt, once you start really embracing Kubernetes, you realize, well, I can't really run one Kubernetes cluster. You have to run multiple clusters for HA reasons or whatever. And, often you end up in like either a hybrid situation or a multi-cloud situation if you've been doing this for long enough. And in all those situations, kind of the older approach to traffic security, where you're looking at IP addresses, where you're doing stuff on the host, where you're doing stuff at the perimeter, starts breaking down really rapidly. So you almost want this layer. It's almost like a SDN, it's like a new layer, Linkerd as the cloud native SDN, where you're doing stuff at layer 7, where you have to solve these problems because you have no real guarantees about anything under layer 7. Layer 3, layer 4 is like a complex hierarchical network that's 90% outside of your control in the first place.
Sure, I get it. I mentioned API security, and of course APIs is such an important part of service mesh. Let's talk a little bit about API security and service mesh and Linkerd and maybe what Buoyant's doing to help on that, William.
Yeah, absolutely. So, there's kind of two general classes of API, at least from my perspective. One of them is user facing, or one of them external facing, right? Like, how do I get traffic into the cluster? And the other is within a cluster. How does the communication happen there? And you kind of have the same tools for treating both, but the implications are a little different because you have a little more confidence within a cluster. But from the service mesh perspective, we basically treat them as the same, and we say, hey, look, what zero trust says is you're not going to trust anything, right? And that you're not going to trust a network, you're not going to trust a host, and all that enforcement is going to happen at the most granular level possible, right? So if you have a service that's meshed with Linkerd, communication is coming into the sidecars, and the sidecar little Linkerd micro proxy is terminating the TLS, it's validating the identity, and then it's also checking, is this request allowed to happen? So if you are A and you're talking to B, once I securely, once I know your identity and I can validate that identity using cryptographic primitives and all that fancy stuff, is that communication allowed to happen? Right? Is this particular request allowed to happen? And that can be parameterized however you want to parameterize it. Linkerd is kind of the enforcement point. So whether that traffic is from within the cluster or outside the cluster kind of doesn't really matter from Linkerd's perspective. We want to give you a uniform layer of API and traffic security based on things like mutual TLS.
Very cool. Hey, man, we're almost out of time here. Well, we probably are over time already, but let's talk a little bit with Buoyant specific, William. What's new with the company, go to market? Just bring us up to speed.
Yeah, so we've been investing heavily in making Linkerd even easier to operate. We have a SaaS product called Buoyant Cloud that is the number one best way to run Linkerd in production. So it allows you to manage your Linkerd installation across many clusters, to do things like policy analysis, so you make sure that your microsegmentation is set up the way that it's supposed to be, to track your TLS usage and see if there's any unexpected plain text connections happening. Kind of every operational aspect that you need, if you're really serious about Linkerd, gets all encoded in Buoyant Cloud. And we've had a great reception there. There's a free tier, so you can try it out yourself. And we can scale all the way up to organizations with massive Linkerd deployments. So primarily, the theme for Buoyant has always been making Linkerd even easier to operate, making Linkerd even more of a thing that you don't have to worry about as an operator.
Absolutely. Excellent, man. Hey, William, I want to thank you for being our guest on Techstrong, coming on back. We always love having you on. For people who want to get more information about Buoyant, can you give them the website?
Absolutely. Go to buoyant.io. That's buoyant.io.
Thanks, man.
We'll read all about it.
All right. Hey, William, fingers crossed, KubeCon Valencia in, I guess, May.
It's May.
That's right. I'm going to be there no matter what.
There.
I'm hoping, me too, man. We'll see you then. Take care and continued success. Keep doing what you're doing, man.
Thanks, Alan.
All right. William Morgan, Linkerd Buoyant CEO, here on Techstrong TV. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back.
we are back. Next up, we've got Techstrong Women. This is episode 2 in our what we hope to be an ongoing series here on Techstrong TV, taking a look at some of the opportunities and challenges that females in IT have faced, and some of the roadblocks, as well as some of the, as I said, opportunities, but some of the goodness that is that the Tech Channel has for females. And in this one, we speak with Lisa Pluggemeyer, who is the executive director over at the National Cybersecurity Alliance. We hear about her story, how she got where she is, and some of the things that she's had to deal with along the way, both positive and negative. As part of that, we discuss some of the communication styles that converge and diverge when it comes to men and women, as well as imposter syndrome, which again is something that is experienced by both males and females, and the importance of mentoring, among some other topics. So it was a great conversation, very insightful, and really worth listening to, regardless of whether you are male or female. So let's go ahead and roll it now. Hey everybody, welcome back to Techstrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and this is the Techstrong Women series, episode number 2. We have a great lineup today, but I want to say hello to my co-host first, Tracy Bannon of MITRE. You're the DevOps advocate over at MITRE, correct?
I am, thank you. Architect, engineer, and kind of a herder of people. So thanks for always being a great posse roundup here.
Yeah, well, I'm so excited about today's episode. We have Lisa Pluggemeyer, who is the interim director over the National Cybersecurity Alliance. Lisa, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Great. So just a quick reminder, Techstrong Women is a series that we recently kicked off here on Techstrong TV. We wanted to celebrate the successes of females in the tech ranks, while also talking about some of the challenges that they've had, not just as women, but also as technologists and experts in their field. So hopefully this discussion will kind of help spur further discussions around equality and moving beyond the gender norms, so that we really have a much more equitable and paritable workforce, and really helping everybody understand each other. So we've had one really great conversation, and I'm really looking forward to this next conversation. I'm going to turn it over to Tracy, because she's going to kick things off today.
Oh, thank you, Charlene. So Lisa, first of all, thank you for agreeing to be our second guest on this. And now, as I was taking a look at the list of women that we've been pulling together and studying who's out there, and looking back at who we've spoke to for our first podcast or our first video cast, I realized that there was a similarity between the two of you and between a couple other folks that are on our list to engage with. And that is, you have a marketing background and a strategist background, and now you find yourself in the forefront of cyber, in leading the charge from that perspective. I'm dying to know how you made your way into cyber from a strategy background.
Well, I worked at a company, a technology company that used to belong to ADP, the big payroll processor and human capital company. And we were in the automotive space. I started with Ford and then went into technology, but always in marketing. And the Jeep hack happened at Black Hat, right around the time of Black Hat that year. And Nissan had a data breach, and all these things started happening. We started seeing OEM customers and car dealers get popped, right? Before the days of MFA, bank accounts getting wiped out by a keylogger because the office manager, clicked on a fish. So because we belong to ADP and we're a part of their robust security program, we felt like we had a competitive advantage. And so I started working with the security team so that we could do thought leadership around security. And this is a company that has 500 million consumer records. So if you bought a car, if you've gone into the finance office and given them your social security number and your driver's license and all those things, that system was the system that was ours, that housed all that data. So, and as you can imagine, car dealers are very busy places with guest Wi-Fi and a lot of people coming and going, and maybe the dealer isn't so tech savvy himself. And the auto industry in general, is very heavily focused on manufacturing and what it takes to protect research and development and manufacturing facilities. But when it came to the broader ecosystem, security was kind of a new thing. So started working with the security team, doing all that thought leadership, got us a speaking spot at JD Power Automotive Conference, things like that. And then ADP announced they were going to spin us off. This was in 2014. And we had 4 months to spin up our own security team and our own, finance and HR and all those administrative functions that Big Brother ADP had been providing were going to go away. And so the chief security officer came to me and said, I want you to join the security team. And I said, well, I'm in marketing. What am I going to do? And he said, well, we should keep doing thought leadership stuff. And we were starting to run workshops for car dealers on how to protect yourself. And we were doing sales meetings with the manufacturers to talk about our security program up front in the sales process so that we weren't a hindrance at the end of, when the salesperson's like, just get this contract signed. And the security team puts their hand up and says, no, wait, stop. We didn't want to do that. We wanted to facilitate sales. So if you think about it, this was a very forward-thinking CISO from that perspective. This was back around 2013, 14. And there weren't a lot of CISOs trying to facilitate their business quite that way. So I had the privilege of working for some really forward-thinking people. But anyway, he said, yeah, we're going to keep doing that stuff. And then I need somebody to work on my board presentations and other, sort of championing security and doing all the messaging that comes out of the security team. Like, I want it to go through you. And, oh yeah, we need a training and awareness program. And I said, what's that? And he said, well, that's that stuff ADP makes us do once a year. And I said, well, I don't want to do that. People hate that stuff. And so he said, hey, you know what? I know a guy at an ad agency in Portland, a production company. And having come from marketing, especially in the consumer world with selling cars and trucks, I loved working with ad agencies, right? They're full of creative people. They're, some of them have a screw loose, which makes them even more crazy. They're wacky, right? They can be some really wacky types. So we did our own in-house security awareness videos and just had an absolute blast. And then I submitted those to SANS, has a conference every year where they have a contest called Video Wars. And I'd only been in that job for, 6 months or a year. And I won my first SANS conference ever, and I won the Video Wars contest. Mm-hmm. So then I was off to the races. So that's how it all started.
In that role, there's a certain amount of happenstance, but it sounds like, what an amazing transition. Throughout this time, though, you came from a marketing background. You didn't. I don't know your undergrad, but I didn't get the impression that it was a computer science. Okay. So it wasn't a computer science background. It wasn't a security background per se.
No, not at all.
So I hated math. Oh. Well, as you became more and more invested in the security side of it, and you had to become much, more savvy as you went, really understand the concepts. Was there ever a point in time where you thought, okay, I'm talking about this, but what if they know that haven't been doing this for 25 years, that I'm not, I am an advocate and a champion for this, and I'm tech savvy and knowledgeable. I call that the imposter syndrome. Have you ever, found yourself thinking about that in the role you're in?
Yeah, absolutely. I think everybody who has ever worked in training and awareness, who came from a soft skilled background, maybe came from corporate communications or marketing or even HR, they will all tell you that they get into those meetings that are highly, highly technical, and they're just trying to hang with it, man, right? They're just trying to follow a conversation. And they always feel like the redheaded stepchild on that team. But the reality is that I can't tell you the number of times I've had, maybe an engineer working in the SOC come to me one-on-one and say, here's the problem. We got to tell people about this. Can you, and I don't know how, can you do that for me? So you do have superpowers that a lot of very gifted folks that, STEM gifted folks don't have. And the sooner you get comfortable with that yourself, and you can make sure that people understand that it's not my job, to work in the SOC. It's not my job to read logs. It's not my job to teach the OWASP class to the developers. It's my job to run the program for the developers, make sure we get them trained and we get them wanting training. So I had a VP of marketing years ago who used to say to me, we don't need to feed them lunch. We need to make them hungry. And everybody who knows me knows I overuse that phrase. But when I ran a developer training program, if you think about, am I just going to assign this to people? Am I going to, first of all, I have to go through the process of getting the heads of engineering to agree to it all, that, we're going to take all these developers off of their job coding and we're going to have X amount of hours that they're going to spend learning about secure coding. That's a persuasion project in itself to get the business to agree to that. And then I've got to, I'm going to push all these developers through this program, or would I rather pull them through this program, right? Do I want to make them hungry for this? I used to say when I first joined the security team, like, we should be the cool kids in school, right? Like, how often is security the topic, not just on the nightly news, but in TV, in movies, it's all over our pop culture, and boy, those guys get to do cool stuff. So how do we build that aura around us? Like, how do we make it desirable for the rest of the business to want to work with us? There's so many security professionals that are constantly trying to get their foot in the door. If you don't work at a defense contractor or financial services institution, if you work maybe at a technology company where the CEO doesn't get up every day thinking about security, then you've got to persuade and cajole and convince the business of some of the things they need to be doing. And so that's a valuable, being able to persuade is a valuable skill. Just ask any social engineer.
And you are so perfectly suited for the role that you're in, or for what you've been doing, right? How do I market this? How do I sell this? How do I tell the story? How do I meet people where they are and make them hungry?
And I would say to people that sit in those meetings that think like, I can barely hang with this conversation, right? A couple of tips there. I used to say that I would seek out the people who spoke Lisa. Like, who can describe this? Here's this concept that I don't understand. I need somebody to explain this to me in words I do understand. And some people are good at doing that, and some people aren't. Depends on how you learn, how you hear things. And so seek out those contacts in the company that you can go to after that meeting and say, hey, you know what? There's this one part that I didn't get. Can you boil this down for me? And then the other thing I'd say is that fear and trepidation that you feel sitting in that meeting, thinking like, oh boy, do they all know I don't get this? I don't get this. Like that, the feeling of panic that you have, where your pulse starts to race a little bit, and you just start to feel anxiety about that in that moment. That's when you need to think about like, okay, why am I here? I'm not here to be an engineer. I'm here to, message whatever this is, or create training about, or write an article about it, or whatever I'm here to do. And so what do I need to get out of this meeting to serve that purpose? And how do I find some quiet confidence in the fact that that's the superpower that I brought to this meeting?
So all that understanding your personal context. I'm sorry, Charlene. Go ahead, please.
I find it interesting that you have kind of become, you started out as basically in marketing, moving into what is essentially an evangelist role for the security department. And having that superpower, if you will, of communication has helped you kind of move beyond, that traditional marketing role into doing the training videos and eventually leading an organization. So do you think that because you had those soft skills that a lot of the security organization or personnel and IT people who freely admit to not being people, and they don't really like to talk to other people because sometimes they, just don't really like to do that. Do you think that that's actually been kind of a catalyst for you in moving forward as you did? Because it sounds like all the pieces were in place for you.
I think, if I understood your question correctly, so I think when I think about one of the things that attracted me to security, the team that I was able to work with, was that they were do-gooders. They want to see the right thing happen, right? They have real moral clarity around right and wrong, which sometimes in the world of sales and marketing can get a little blurry. And I was kind of tired of that, to be honest, especially when you're selling software. It's a little different when you're selling a car or truck, right? But in the world of technology, there's a lot of stuff that gets marketed that often doesn't deliver. Mm-hmm. And so I was looking for a little more clarity there. And a lot of them have a history of service, right? They maybe they worked in federal law enforcement or served in the military. They want to serve others and they want to see the right thing happen. And I found it super, super refreshing to work with those people, number one, because I was in awe of them. And then number two, I felt like it was a privilege to be their voice.
Right.
Because like you said, a lot of them didn't have the soft skills, or they were on the tip of the spear, right? They're out there on the front line, protecting the company every day, protecting these 500 million Social Security numbers and those consumers. And the things that they deal with and the things that they see, nobody else in the company has to see or has to deal with because they've done their job so well. And so to kind of be their voice, like when they came to me with a concern and they wanted, can we get an article in the company newsletter about this? Or can we, I've got to go into this meeting. Can you help me with my slides? Because I got to talk to the business. I felt privileged to help be their voice and to help them get to clarity of message. Because very frequently, because they are on the front lines and they're frazzled and they work long hours and all those things, when they try to communicate on some of these topics, their passion gets the better of them, right? And it kind of reminds me of the guys I saw at RSA. I think it was in 2020, the last RSA in person. There were some people in a booth that literally had foil hats on. And you don't want to go to the business sounding like the foil hat guy when you're going to go give a presentation. So I felt really privileged to be their voice and super appreciated because they knew that there's stuff happening in the security team sees all day that the rest of the company needs to be aware of, but in a way that gets us to our business goals.
Well, I love the fact that you entered into your relationship with them, if you want to call it that, with a level of respect that they already had for you and for your soft skills, your ability to be their voice. And sometimes I don't feel as though, especially with marketing folks, and we covered this in our last conversation, that sometimes marketing isn't viewed that way, and that they're the kind of, it's not a technical division, it's not a technical organization. And so it's maybe sometimes viewed as kind of less important than other areas in an organization. So I love the fact that, exactly, yeah. So it's not really integral at the end of the day. But I love the fact that because you entered the role as an evangelist, there was that level of respect because they did see you as their mouthpiece. So I think that's amazing.
It's an interesting comment that when you talk about having that ability to message or to sell, right? The ability to sell ideas. So if you're familiar with MITRE, if you're familiar with FFRDCs, are federally funded, they're research and development corporations, amazing engineers and architects and all kinds of technical folks, PhDs. I've never been in a room where I'm the most educated. I'm always the poor schmuck in the corner. And the reason I say that is that I'm finding across the board that technique, that being able to sell a concept, when you use the term marketing, when you use the term sell, there's a pullback from that. Somehow that's not technical. It's not pure. Those are words. But what your team showed you, and I'm hoping that as folks listen to this and watch this, they realize that diversity on the team that you have is exactly what we're seeking, right? We need to have those different skill sets, those different superpowers, right? Isn't it the League of Heroes that they have, and all kinds of different capabilities, not just one? Wonderful that they were able to do that. Was there ever a point before that, Lisa, as you were coming into this role or as you're growing through this, where you didn't feel that they were hearing your voice yet, or you were stepping into the role and having to, I don't know.
Not since I've been in security, more early in my career as a woman in automotive. That was definitely more challenging times. It was old boys network. There were things that were acceptable back then that are no longer acceptable today.
So noted.
Yeah, I think that was especially working. I interned in a factory setting, walking the factory floor where Chevrolet was building Blazers. And then when I first went to work for Ford, they hand you the keys to a company car and a map of North Carolina and say, go get them. And it's, you're 20-something female from Detroit talking to car dealers in the South. So it was, that was challenging. And I had a sales quota, wholesale quota. So that was a little bit more challenging because that relationship, that franchisor-franchisee relationship is very much just that, relationship driven. And so figuring out how I'm going to get a 40 or 50-something-year-old male, 99.9% of the time male car dealer principal to listen to what I have to say to help him market and sell cars and trucks, that was a huge challenge. If there was ever a time that I had a little bit of imposter syndrome, it was probably then. And then I had the privilege of working for Ford in Europe and worked in the Middle East and Northern Africa and Eastern Europe in the 90s. Those years after the Berlin Wall came down and we wanted to sell cars and trucks to people who'd been on wait lists for 10 years for a Wartburg or a Trabant. And I think dealing then in developing markets in some of the, we used to call the third world, now we call the developing world in the Middle East and then North Africa and Eastern Europe back then too, after the wall fell. That was a challenge, very male dominated, things, like I said, there's things that are acceptable in other countries. There's things that are legal in other countries that we're not used to in the United States. One of my early bosses at Ford, when I asked him about sort of career planning, because in the US, they did, back then in the 90s, they did longer range career planning with women and had more frequent coaching and counseling sessions, they would call them, similar to a performance review. You get to Europe, they don't do those things. And as a matter of fact, when I asked one of my early bosses, this is a long time ago, these people are long retired, what was the career plan? Like, what's next? Like, I've been in this role for X number of years. Like, what's on the horizon? He said, well, what are your husband's plans? And I said, my husband doesn't work for Ford Motor Company. That was not illegal for him to ask me that at Ford of Germany. That was what they were getting at was, we were talking about maybe an overseas assignment. I ended up going to the UK from Germany. And so that's kind of where he was going, was like, well, would your husband's job move? How would that work? But in the US, that would have been against the rules to ask somebody of either gender that question. So I think having had the fortune to live abroad for 13 years really made it, I know in this country right now, there's a lot of people that look at all the things that are wrong. But I think having lived abroad for so long and traveled in developing countries for so long, it's made me realize we have a really good, a great place. And I think in some instances, we've kind of taken that for granted and re-baselined. And there's just there's the plight of a lot of women in a lot of countries around the world, even countries we would think, at that time, this is Germany in the 90s, you would think it's a pretty sophisticated place, right? Western Europe. But it wasn't quite where we were yet, and so I think all those situations kind of molded me back then. And, going into a distributorship in a Middle Eastern country as a female in the 90s to talk to a room full of men, like I had to check my imposter syndrome at the door. I could not go in there not knowing what I was talking about or showing any, because it could often be a strained relationship depending on the distributor and the manufacturer. If you have a tough message to deliver, for example, coming from Dearborn, from on high, you just got to put on your big boy pants. I mean,
Can we say that?
Wait, say that. Big person pants.
Big person pants.
Just kind of suck it up and get on with it,
So do you think that actually changed your perspective then when you came back to the States on the way that the dynamic within an organization? I mean, you did say that we have it so much better here in the
I had been through much, much bigger challenges, interning on a factory floor, working with car dealers, being the only woman in the room this most of the time, that I kind of came back thinking, what are y'all talking about? It's just a cakewalk.
Did that also change the way that you interacted with people? I mean, was it because I do notice that, obviously the way men and women communicate to not only to each other, but, amongst themselves. So, women talk to women differently than women talk to men and vice versa. Did you find that the way that you started communicating with men and with other women changing because of the way you saw the way things had to be done in Europe, and it was much more male dominated and forceful, and that, did that kind of force you to think that way? And
early in my career, I met some women leaders in automotive. I don't want you to get the impression that there weren't any, but so many of the ones that I met, even while I was interning, meeting very senior females in General Motors, for example, I felt like they were competing to be men. I felt like I do think that I was able to successfully navigate still being myself, still being a woman in that world, as opposed to feeling like I had to be one of the boys. That is something that I think changed in my lifetime. I don't think my daughters, who are young adults, necessarily feel like they have to be one of the boys to be in the work situations that they're in. And one of my daughters is in STEM. So I think that's a good thing. It's changed in my lifetime. I think what really made a difference for me when I transitioned into security was the boss that I had. And he was a man that understood how to mentor a woman. So it's different. And I went to, not to harp on automotive, but I went to Automotive News, which is the big industry rag in that space. It's a Cranes publication. They have a thing called Leading Women every year, a conference. And a couple of years back, before I left the auto industry, I was attending, and there was, fantastic speakers, leaders in the auto industry. And one after one, they all got up, and as they were telling their stories, giving their presentations, you realize that there was this theme throughout of them feeling like they weren't ready for the next step every time it was time for them to take that next step. And that I've actually read a little bit more about that. That's kind of a documented thing, that if a boss says to a male member of the team, I think you're ready for this next job, and the male is thinking, I feel about 80% ready, but like, that's good enough, let's go, right? If a woman feels 80% ready, she's like, nope, I got to get that 20% before
nail it down.
I'm going to feel comfortable. We're more risk averse. And I think it takes our male bosses often to be able to say, you know what, I know you don't think you're ready, but I think you're ready. And so we're going to do this. And every single one of those women had that same dynamic in her career. We all had that in common. And I've seen that in my own life personally. And I do think we kind of have to get over ourselves a little bit, right? Like we're more concerned than if we're more worried than our boss is, then like, what are we worried about? Right.
So do you think the next generation, I mean, you said you have daughters. Do you think the next generation is feeling that way also? Or do you think that that's kind of changing as the workforce does become much more integrated, for lack of a better word, but it really does more reflect society today?
Absolutely. I mean, I have a daughter who's in her last year of her engineering program, and she's at a co-op school at Northeastern University. And so she's co-oping right now at Bain Consulting. And she, through all her first co-op was a construction company where she got to put on a hard hat and go to construction sites. And then her second one was with a law firm where I'd hazard a guess that, the majority of the lawyers there were male. She's never once said to me, I've never seen any hint at imposter syndrome in her. I've only ever seen this confidence to just keep pushing ahead. She's a really driven individual and super bright. I'm really proud of her. And And I just don't see her coming up against some of the same stuff that I had to come up against at that age. You know, I hope nobody at the law firm was catcalling her, but I don't think that's
right.
It's not a factory floor, right? That's not happening. Yeah.
That's an interesting. It's an interesting observation that we tend to think and observe. I have a granddaughter, and her journey. Looking at, is she going to face quite the same things? And no, I don't think so. I tell the story as I led a JAD session at the end of this. I'm in my glory. I'm whiteboarding, and there's an engineer, a bridge engineer at the end of the table. And when it was all done, he came over and patted me on the hand and said, "You did a good job." So I don't think anybody's, oh yes, I can tell you his name, but I won't do that. And my kids know that story, but my daughter won't have that story. But I'm wondering what the story will be, because the moment that we stop talking about diversity, the moment we let our guard down, we're not solid in this yet. Mm-hmm. We can have some backsliding. So I still do think that, as much as I don't want my adjective to be woman architect, woman engineer, mm-hmm. I'm still proud of my adjective, or should I say I'm still proud of my identity. Do you see anything with the younger women in your tribe, those that are behind you, that you're mentoring, that you're bringing along? Are there obstacles that you're seeing in their path that might be different than the ones that you faced, but could still be tied to their identity?
I think women they don't have that bravado. I don't think that we necessarily come out of the womb with that kind of bravado that men have. Right. That's sort of like, yeah, I'm just going to go kill it. Right. I got this. We're just, and I see it, you know, with a lot of teams that I've worked with, it's literally just confidence. You know, it's just plain old fashioned, like, believe in yourself. You know, it's really that simple. I know that's hard to do, but it comes with time, and it comes with accomplishments. You know, I think the more we're able to get done, you know, the more. I've always kept a me folder in my on my laptop, right? Like those times when you're like, wow, I hit this project out of the park, or that meeting went really well, or, you know, compiling that somewhere, and, you know, every couple months go back and look, like, okay, when I'm not feeling like I'm getting anything done, or I'm achieving anything, or I'm not feeling incredibly confident, being able to go back and look at, like, I did this and I did that, and I got this done and I got that done. And that can really fuel your sense of self and your sense of confidence. I think we're our own worst critics.
I was on a team that I was truly the only female, and I did something very similar, but I would print it out and I would tuck it under my keyboard. And every once in a while, I would just need to pull that back and see the number of snippets and things that were there. That was my me. Yep. And there was a self-actualizing that comes with it. Yeah. There's probably another good conversation for another day that talks about kind of the human brain and how things are wired. My husband coaches men and women, boys and girls, and he talks very adamantly about observing differences, you know, when they get to a point when they get into puberty, and how he sees, he tells the young man, you know, kick it this way, kick it that way. You know, you're doing it the wrong way. He kind of has to beat him up a little bit, because they're like, no, it's not my fault. He can make the same comment to a woman or to a girl, and she internalizes it as though it's a character thing. Yep. So it's kind of interesting that he brings that up when we're talking about, you know, raising kids that way. I mean,
equality doesn't mean treating everybody the same, right? We're individuals, we're different people. It means knowing, you know, being sensitive enough to understand. I mean, your husband's smart enough to understand, or sensitive enough to see those differences, and then to vary his response accordingly. And that's really what it's about. It's actually about, like, if you think about it from a marketing world terminology perspective, it's about personalization and differentiation,
right?
More than it's about sameness.
You just made a big difference in my life, Lisa. Because you said it's okay to acknowledge the differences, and it's okay to tailor to that so that you can meet somebody where they are and get the most out of them.
I don't think we want to live in a world where everything is the same.
No homogenization, please.
I think that, especially over the last, I would say 10 years or so, I think organizations have really started to recognize that there are differences in the way males and females work and are most productive. And sometimes to get the best level of productivity out of them, you've got to meet them on their terms. And I think that is a brand new way of thinking that organizations, maybe, they especially HR organizations, they've never really kind of thought about before. But it seems to be, especially now with so many people who are working remotely full time, I think they are recognizing the differences in the way males and females work, and they're celebrating that. They're saying, you do what you need to do, and we'll make it work around you.
Take it a step further, Charlene. The generations, I see a marked difference in the generations as well. I had a team that was made up of all 30 somethings and early 30 somethings. And we were traveling as a group, and we were going sometimes 2 or 3 cities in a week. And they all wanted to get into the same conference room at all times and work together, all of them. It's as though they were all getting a participation ribbon, but they worked that way well. It drove me batty, absolutely nuts. And so I had to figure out, how can I be present with them and not absolutely drowned in this same room at the same time? And so it was interesting to start to experience that with the different generations. And I also see some of it culturally, regionally, even campuses, corporate cultures. Diversity is so much more than gender. It's just a more natural place for us to start in having the conversation, don't you think?
I think that one of the, so I've been diving into this a little bit because we're starting a program for kids at historically Black colleges and universities who are studying cybersecurity or want to get into security, privacy, or risk. And we decided that one of the critical elements of the program is going to be a mentorship program. And so we've taken a look at other nonprofits running mentorship programs and how those work. And I've participated in a few myself. And I think, we look at sort of, you talk about companies and programs and HR initiatives and all these things. When you boil all that down, at the end of the day, it's a human talking to another human. Like, those are the, I can't think of a time when I look back on my career and it was some sort of like article from corporate comms that changed my life. Right? Not to bash HR, but like, it was never like some big initiative from HR or some slogan that made the difference. It was some individual saying something that I needed to hear, right? Or coaching me through a situation, or helping me prepare for a meeting or something. And I see the same thing. Like when I had somebody that I was mentoring lately who reached back out to me a few months later and said, you know what, I work at X company now. I left where I was and I got this new job and this happened and that happened. And it was because of this conversation that we had 6 months ago. And those are just one-on-one things. And so we're actually looking at the software tools now that you use to run mentoring programs, because those help you do it at scale, right? And I think those things are like the greatest things since sliced bread, to just match up individuals. It's like dating, right? It's an algorithm that matches the mentor and the mentee, and off they go. And it's structured enough that people, can get on calls with each other and their schedule's going to align and they can have some quality conversations. And I think I would encourage more people, especially people at stage in their careers that I'm at, to take it. It can be as little as, an hour a month to get on the phone with a young person. Yep. And just talk to them about their careers and their plans. And it's super rewarding.
What do you think about, when we are talking about mentoring, and especially with respect to people who are just entering the workforce? I feel like there is a generation now of people coming out of college who really seriously have no idea what they want to do. Right. And they went and they got an engineering degree, or they got a criminal justice degree, or whatever. They're like, now what do I do? They might not necessarily want to be in the field that they got a degree in. And I feel like organizations currently don't really have, how do I say it? They're not really considering those people who are not within their lane, for lack of a better word or better term, as viable candidates for different positions. But I feel like we are missing out on an entire population of people who are smart, who want to learn, who and females especially, they don't really feel like, to our earlier conversation, don't really feel like they have the qualifications or the education to be able to do certain things that aren't within their major. So how do you see that kind of falling out? Do you think that we're maybe moving in a direction now where we are recognizing the value in those non-traditional employees, or do you think we've still got a long way to go as far as that?
I hope so, because the job market is so tight. If you're an employer that isn't hiring for potential, then you're missing out on a lot of people, I think. And I talked to somebody who's got an open rec yesterday, who's looking for a unicorn. And, I talked about how, look, I know some of the people that they're talking to for this particular role. And I said, a lot of these people have the potential to do that. You've got your checklist of things that you're looking for, and, you're hyper focused on these 2 or 3 boxes that are empty on the checklist when you've got all these other things and this person has all this potential. I just think maybe we're a little bit too picky. I had no idea what I wanted to do when I went to work for.
I still don't know what I want to do. Yeah. There's a fantastic term that I've been acquainted with. It's called new collar worker. And it is non-traditional. So it's not white collar, not blue collar, new collar. Let's take somebody and bring them in, especially we were talking about it in terms of technology. If I need coders, well, they might not be the architect or the engineer, but if I liken it to building a house, well, they've got to learn to pound the nail somewhere. They've got to learn those skills. So let's not worry about which degree they have or certification or 2-year program or 1-year experience. Let's help them, because the number of intelligent, amazing people out there is mind-boggling. So I'm looking now, another one of the diversity aspects is educational diversity. And I don't mean that it has to be multiple degrees. I mean, let's really bring that to the table as well. You are so spot on, Lisa, Charlene.
I think academia has a role to play in this too, because a lot of the colleges these days, you need to decide what school you're going to apply to. There's no switching back and forth without starting all over again. I mean, a lot of schools have made it absolutely impossible to change your major. And you're asking a 16, 17, 18-year-old to know what they want to do for the rest of their lives. Right. And that's just kind of silly.
Well, I'll sound like a heretic as a mother of 2 that are college grads who are paying their own way at this point. I think there are a lot of kids, a lot of amazing people who don't need a 4-year degree. One of the most brilliant people I know grew up in my hometown, and he is a farmer, and he also does robotics on the side, and he's amazing, but he chose to not go. It didn't interest him to go. So intelligence is not only that degree. We need folks with advanced degrees. We absolutely do. At the same time, there are so many amazing minds out there.
Yeah,
there really are.
Guys, I hate to wrap this up, but we are running out of time. But Lisa, thank you so much for being on Techstrong Women. You are amazing. And
thank you for having me. This was a blast.
I had such a great time listening to your story. So fascinating, and it's very inspirational as well. So thank you. And Tracy, you're awesome as always. Thank you for being on the show again.
Every show, I take away something that I learn and grow. So it's always worth it to be here. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Right. We'll see you next time on Techstrong Women. And please stay tuned. We've got lots more Techstrong TV coming up.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
All right, we're back. Next up, we have our Something Old segment. This is from the DevOps Connect DevSecOps at RSAC 2021 event. This was the VC keynote panel, and it was titled A VC's Look at What the New Normal Means for DevSecOps. This one features Alan Schimmel moderating an all-star panel made up of Andy Ellis, who was the former CSO at Akamai, who is now with YL Ventures, Thomas Crane, who's a principal over at Insight Ventures, Chensi Wang, who is with Rain Capital, and Cindy Gula, who's managing partner at Gula Tech Adventures. They discuss what VCs are seeing on the tech landscape moving forward and what the new normal how the new normal is impacting cybersecurity and DevSecOps in general. Great conversation. Let's go ahead and roll it now.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today at RSA Conference, DevOps Connect DevSecOps. This panel that we're going to be doing right now is one that I was really excited that we were able to put together. I reached out to several of my friends in the industry, and they didn't let me down. They came here today, and I think we're going to have a great discussion on what the VC view is as we go into a new normal as it relates to investing in cyber companies, DevSecOps companies, etc. Let me introduce you to this rockstar panel, and we're going to jump right into it. I'm going to start off with my friend Cindy Gula, and Cindy is with the Gula Foundation. But Cindy, why don't you introduce yourself and maybe a little bit about, the Gula, well, it's not, the foundation is a charitable, but Gula Ventures as well, right?
Yeah, so Gula Tech Adventures. We like to call it an adventure because we knew we were going to do more than just invest and have a venture. So we like to play on the words and call it an adventure. So under the Gula Tech Adventures, we do invest directly in cybersecurity companies and in funds, mostly concentrated on investing in cybersecurity companies. We do have the Gula Tech Foundation, charitable foundation, which we do try to invest in nonprofit companies that are serving the cybersecurity public as well. So we see those things kind of going hand in hand in order to raise everybody in national security and defense. But my background, my husband and I, who might be a little bit more well-known as Ron Gula, we are voluntarily related, is how I like to say it. We started a company, an intrusion detection system, Network Security Wizards, with the Dragon intrusion detection system in '98. Then we started Tenable Network Security in 2002. When we both left in 2015 and 16, we started Gula Tech Adventures. And so we really are excited about new technologies, knowing what's going on, and really helping companies, move forward and into this area and really be successful and have fun.
Absolutely. And for those of you from RSA Conference, tomorrow Ron and Cindy will be announcing some of the winners of the Gula Foundation grants. And so if you have your RSA admission, don't miss that. You can check it out. Thank you, Cindy. Next up, probably the newest VC on our panel, but you may know him as CSO Andy, where he was the CSO at Akamai for most of my security career of 20 years plus. Andy Ellis, now with YL Ventures. Andy, welcome, and maybe a little bit about yourself and YL.
Thanks, Alan. Thanks for having me. As you said, I was at Akamai for 20 years. Before that, actually, I was sort of in a nearby industry to Ron and Cindy when I was doing information warfare in the Air Force, and we did buy from a competitor, unfortunately. That was the Wheel Group at the time that Cisco later acquired.
I remember.
Now I'm at YL Ventures, and we focus on seed stage Israeli cybersecurity startups, where our model is to take them from seed to lead and really invest in giving them not just the capital, but the support to build out the initial starts of a company.
Excellent. Our next panel member is Thomas Crane with Insight. Thomas, I'm always not sure now if it's Insight Partners, Insight Ventures.
Or is
We're
it just
Insight
Insight?
Partners today. We took the venture out of our name, but it's still in our DNA. So
Great. Thomas, a little background on you and Insight for those in the audience.
sure, absolutely, and thanks for having me, Alan. I've been at Insight. Started my career at the firm almost 10 years ago. Historically, Insight's been known in the software ecosystem as a later stage investor. I mean, some of our early wins in the security space, like Beyond Trust, for example, have now moved into. Now we're moved into focusing on really the next gen of security and security startups and even more mature companies as well. So Tenable. One of my first investments at Insight. So it's great to see you, Cindy. And of course, focused heavily on the Israeli security ecosystem as well. So Andy, I'm sure we've got some boards and other mutual opportunities to discuss.
Excellent. Then last but not least is one of my friends in the industry, Chensi Wang. Chensi, besides being a VC, has, like Andy and Cindy, a long CV of success within the cyber industry, from the analyst side of the house, from the enterprise side of the house, from the vendor. Chensi, welcome, and give a little background.
Yes, thank you, Alan. Nice to meet you. Nice to be here. I've done a lot of panels actually with Alan over the years. Like Alan said, I'm the founder and general partner of Rain Capital. We are a cyber-focused seed stage investment firm in the Silicon Valley. I am the sole GP, and I started in this industry as an engineer. I have a PhD in computer science, started actually writing code in assembly and moved to compilers and C++. And then I did industry research, moved from academic research to industry. And then I did operator work, executive work at companies. Now I am doing investments. So I'm moving from assembly code to more and more meta today.
Up the stack, as they say.
But still engineer at heart. And so very happy to be here and talk about security industry and security investments.
Great. So guys, what a year it's been, right? What a strange year in a year of heartache and calamity and just tragedy around the world. In cybersecurity and technology in general, other than, we've all probably lost friends over the last year. But other than that, business-wise, it's been a phenomenal year. It seems the money's being raised, the amounts of monies and the breadth of money raised, right? The companies, unicorns aren't, unicorns aren't so unique anymore. There's unicorns all over the place. It's been an unusual year, but as we said off camera, I believe we're heading into a new normal now, right? I think we are finally starting to maybe put this a little bit in our rearview mirror. As we move into this new normal, though, I think it's going to be a tremendous opportunity again. I maybe I'm optimistic, and you guys can tell me I'm wrong, but I think there's unboundless opportunity. Maybe you don't share my views, though, or not, and I'd like to hear about that. As VCs, what are you looking for? What do you think's going to happen as we move into this new normal? Andy, since you're the newest VC on the panel, I'm going to ask you to go first. But then after that, guys, feel free to jump on and give us your views. Go ahead, Andy.
I've always been a fan of the ask the junior person first so they don't just copy other folks, and I just hadn't realized it was going to be me at this point.
Yeah, it happens.
I think the new normal or the next normal or whatever we want to call it, what we're going to see is this pivot away from word of mouth communications. And if we think about the DevOps world especially, I think there's a lot of organizations that think DevOps means I don't have to write anything down. That's not what DevOps means, just to be very clear, but certainly people often approach Agile as, can I get rid of process? And can I not record things? And as we distribute our workforce, that doesn't work anymore. And so what I tend to look for as I think about which companies are going to succeed and really fit is folks who can provide some level of comprehensive coverage to let you see all across an ecosystem. Whether it's a process ecosystem, can you bring security operations to any part of the development lifecycle? Is it around understanding all the assets that a company has? Recently, we sold our stake in Exonius, which was all about making sure you just knew what your assets were, because that's a hard problem. And too many companies relied on, oh yeah, I remember that we didn't put this in the asset database. That's not an acceptable way of doing business. And being able to satisfy companies as they recognize that transition has happened is, I think, a place where I'm certainly keeping an eye on opportunities.
Anyone wanted?
I've definitely seen the shift to working from home, accelerating the need to being more with Agile, a little bit more retrospective. It's not getting into a room and, being able to communicate and possibly you're not heard because of the dynamics of the group that you're trying to work in and things. So the companies that actually are accelerating and fulfilling and encouraging the diversity, the listening, the ability to be heard in the Agile system retroactively, I think, again, is starting to fit right into where people are. And that's one thing that's so hard in this industry is we're trying to make the industry and making people come into the industry, not meeting people where they are to be successful in, this area. So there's so many different attitudes, aptitudes that it really does need to come and be, I guess, more agile or retrospective agile to go meet them where they are.
Yeah, I want to add to that. As we think about innovation, as we're all in the business of investing in innovation, there are innovations that happen intentionally. There are also innovations that happen accidentally, right? And I think this past year has really proved to be a disruption to the normal world that we know. And anytime there's disruption, there are accidental opportunities that arise from this disruption. And we saw a lot last year. One of my companies, now we're talking about the Israeli ecosystem, one of my companies called Midiga, which is a managed incident response service provider. And when they first started, they actually started at the end of 2019. And their whole thing is about providing services without sending a single person on site. And nobody wanted at the end of 2019. And everybody's like, you got to send a team over. We're not going to do business with you. And a quarter later, they could not even take all the calls that come in, right? Because everybody wanted contactless incident response. And that is an example of accidental opportunities that arose from the disruption. And as good investors, I think we should seize the opportunity, not only intentional innovation opportunities, but also the disruption caused accidental opportunities. And I see a lot of companies are doing that. So very, very happy to see that.
Absolutely. I mean, I think if there's one thing, we've always, at least I've been accustomed to hearing, is that security is sort of trying to impose, guardrails or impose sorts of constraints around how folks work or how agile teams deploy software or whatever. And I think security teams have realized, and this has been pulled forward because of COVID, that it's security isn't about putting up barriers. It's about meeting employees where they are and, being able to work within the confines of how employees want to work. I mean, it started with the shift from on-prem to SaaS, and now it's SaaS to just highly distributed everything. And, if you're not adapting to that as a security vendor and you're still trying to build the wall, you're not going anywhere fast.
And a lot with the fatigue, Zoom fatigue, or just trying to meet remotely. So many people want automation because it's you can't rely on somebody else to do that anymore. So what they can be automated for them so that when they are developing, it is actually more focused. Is also a really big area that we've seen a lot of pitches and things. It's tough to get it right because automation can go sideways, but when it works well and makes the developers that much more efficient, that's what everybody's looking for.
Yeah, I agree. Automation is. Look, I learned my lesson in automation when we went from selling an IDS to an IPS back in 2002 or something. I thought it was, who wouldn't want automated attack blocking? Well, no one. No one wanted it. Everyone was afraid they were going to, kill their CEO's traffic or something like that. So automation, though sometimes it sounds great. Now, we've come a long way. Automation, especially as we talk about in DevOps and CD pipelines. But quite frankly, supply chain attacks were the big story at the beginning of this year. They remain a big story. And, I don't know if automation contributed to the supply chain attack or not, but, we need to be looking at these new vectors, these new attack surfaces.
That maybe automation doesn't help. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Thomas.
I was going to say, the adversaries are automating, so we better make sure that we're responding to that. I mean, it's really cool to talk about an AI-enabled endpoint system. How about an AI-enabled malware? I mean, that's the stuff that kind of keeps me up at night, for sure. And so, and there's absolutely a tit for tat going on with a lot of this stuff out there.
But speed is still king. I mean, speed is still a factor.
Speed kills.
And it absolutely does. And so tools that even help, like one of our companies, the Security Trails, it actually helps see if your domains are outside of what you think they are. I mean, these companies that help you trace back and actually crawl the internet to see what's really there and not just what you assume to be there. It's not necessarily in DevOps. However, it started there to meet the speed and, create unintended consequences.
Well, when we talk about supply chain attacks, I think a lot of it came from the SolarWinds incident, right? And even though it's a supply chain incident, I don't think we should attribute it necessarily to automation. This was a very sophisticated attack that the adversaries looked at which vectors of which they can hide, and they came in. They didn't do anything for like 60 days, right? No amount of testing or red teaming is going to catch that. The point is that we, as security practitioners and professionals, what we need to be focusing on are places where the blast radius is large. And SolarWinds is indeed one of those points, right? And as we do more and more automation, we will see that there are points in the system that are more brittle, causes bigger blast radius, and those are the places that with the highest risk, and then we should be focusing on those.
And I think there is a touch point from that back towards automation, which is if we don't do automation or orchestration right, with the least privilege approach where you say, what is the API that enables only this to happen? What ends up happening is we deploy technologies like SolarWinds, which are administrative access everywhere. That remains one of the worst dangers we have in so many environments is compromise an administrator, or compromise, in this case, an administrative software package, and you own everything in an environment. So whether that's something like NotPetya compromising a domain admin and getting access to everything in your system, or somebody in the supply chain compromising SolarWinds Orion, and that's installed on all of your devices, and now they can move laterally. We have to get orchestration and automation right to enable the speed that I think Cindy correctly points out. We've got to have that speed. But if we can't enable that speed safely, we're just creating these explosives that will have massive blast radiuses when we get compromised.
Yeah. So, as we look out over the horizon for this coming year now, right, and it's this new normal, what are the kinds of, so automation Cindy brings up, where in the security stack are you really, jazzed about looking in that you think we can really make some progress?
I'll jump in first. There are a lot of different places we're looking at, but one space I am very personally excited about is the human aspect of risk management, right? I actually was just on that webinar earlier. We talked about how developers now becoming a very visible target for attacks. People are actually doing targeted phishing to developers to get developers' credentials so they can log into their GitHub account or GitLab account to get their, not only get their source code, but only even embed code into their development process. So that is a pretty critical vector of attack that we must protect against. And so, but how do you protect developers? Developers are out there all the time. They're pulling down code from everywhere, open source, you name it, right? And so you have to give developers, for instance, a different kinds of security awareness training than you would give to other folks in the company. And hence brings my point is human risk management has to be with the roles and responsibilities in the company within the context of their job. And we're looking at new functionality, excuse me, and new solutions in that sector that allows us to do that. So that's one, I don't want to monopolize the conversation, but that's one area that I'm looking at.
Yeah, and for the developer, post-production as well. I mean, I think one area that's got a lot of buzz right now is API security. And yeah. Part of it is just the proliferation of APIs and, you know, microservices-based applications. But it's really, if you take a step back, it's finally you're living up to this promise of runtime application security, which was never really possible before in kinds of monolithic apps where maybe you try to wrap, you know, a security layer around it, but it creates performance challenges. Maybe you have a WAF, but we all know there's some limitations to, you know, how deep into the logic of the application a WAF can go. And now today, with everything based in Amazon and developers are able to push code into the cloud and apps can be updated multiple times a day, you now actually can get into that level of security. And I mean, there's been some pretty high profile API level attacks in just the last few weeks. I mean, Experian was one making headlines last week alone. So yeah.
I think one area that we need to get right is actually just identity on your digital identity anyway. I mean, that we can't vote digitally is you know, how is that a success in our industry? You know, the idea that, you know, we can't do some of the smaller things, yet we keep piling on the same type of identity, you know, wrappers and relying on the same information. We need to do something different. We need to push that forward in a secure way. And I think, again, identity was never meant to be 100% secure, but I think if we really go into the areas where they're really starting to consider how we can actually make digital identity effective, I think we'll go a long way as an industry protecting people on the internet.
I like all of those. And then the place I'm most looking is how do we take and give security functionality into the developers? How do we make it that rather than a developer build something and then they have to give it to a security team and then argue over what they need to do, that it is just part of the developer ecosystem, that they get real context that tells them, look, you have 100 vulnerabilities here, but 99 of them don't matter. Just fix this one right now. Don't go argue, just do that. And it's easy to do because it's in your pipeline. And these other 99 we'll keep track of for you. Maybe you fix them in your next release. But those are conversations that waste a lot of energy and human capital inside companies right now. And can you actually do that all throughout the ecosystem and get rid of this need for everybody to have an outside security consultant or even, you know, inside in their company, but that they get real-time tactical security support where their job is?
Yeah, and I would say even go a step beyond, not just for your development lifecycle and vulnerabilities, right? For everything, right? Yeah. There's so many people can come in and scan your GitHub repos for you and tell you have credentials exposed, but you guess what? A lot of these credentials may not matter. And so where do you focus? And so I think in the security industry, we actually have way too many people are finding problems for you, but not enough people are helping you fixing them. And that's another area that we should be looking at.
It's always been a problem in my mind with security, is we're very good at pointing out where there's a problem, where there's a vulnerability. We're not so good at, prioritizing and getting them fixed and done.
Yeah, we are the Debbie Downers,
Yeah, that's the bad news generation.
But we'd have been the people on the Ides of March saying, "Hey, Julius, did you know that your shirt's unbuttoned and you've got a stain on your shirt?" And like 4 hours later, oh, and by the way, you've been stabbed in the back.
Right.
It's funny. Identity, to your point, Cindy. Look, with everyone, whether people are going to come back hybrid or not, the whole and with the move, how much digital transformation, cloud migration we saw this year. To me, identity is the new black in security. That's the battlefront. We need to get identity right. Finally, we've been stepping around it for a really long time, but we need to get this right.
We need to figure it out.
And there's two things that, not trying to take advantage of a terrible situation, but the public was very personally impacted by needing to be digitally accessible online. When they're kids, they had to expose their children online in a way that they had never been comfortable before. And now we have their attention. So we need to educate. We need to make sure that this isn't a cybersecurity thing. This is a data care thing. This is their data care. This is personal. They have a responsibility. But then as companies, we have a responsibility to protect that data and provide them with privacy as well. And so it's almost a thoughtful shift of responsibility as compared to chasing security. The public should be demanding security. And that's kind of the whole point here is it's not a luxury to have DevSecOps. It's a requirement, and it will be becoming more and more of a requirement. So how we work this together, instead of resisting, jump on board and let's make it better.
That might be the quote of the whole panel. Anybody want to add to that, or I wanted to ask
on identity? I would just one thing, and this dovetails to what Cindy was saying too. Is like there's some basic stuff that still doesn't get done in the security world. I mean, and I'm talking about as simple as a password manager. Like that's not a standard practice in every enterprise, whereas it should be. All right, and you think it's so obvious. I mean, a lot of consumers buy password managers, but why would we not do that in a B2B setting? The other big change in identity right now is just the importance of machine identity. And, I think of like an Okta, but for machine to machine connection. I feel like that still hasn't really been properly tackled. I'm involved with a company called Keyfactor on the board there. And, they're all about securing digital identity between machine to machine, but even cloud workload to machine. And, with DevOps and Kubernetes just spitting out all sorts of connections, how do you know that those are properly authorized and secured?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of areas of exploration here, right? Cindy talked about the Data Care Act, which is really largely, I think, is for consumer identity and how to protect consumer identity, which is an area of its own and which has, I think, regulation can come into play and privacy can come into play. And this country, we still don't have a nationwide privacy law, right? So, and if we have to code our application to every sector law, then that's a lot to do. So that's one. But in the enterprise, the identity management is a very different ball game. So we're looking at employee identities. We're looking at identities that have to be provisioned for different cloud application, enterprise application, and service identity, right? So we have so many microservices, communications. We need to have identities associated with all of those endpoints. And that's yet another new identity management area. So we need to have innovation in all those different areas and not necessarily same technology, but looking at universal service identity to protect communications between services and innovation in enterprise identity management that enables fast provisioning of services to your employee base is really interesting especially today with the remote workforce, right? It's an interesting area of exploration.
Yep. Guys, I wanted to bring up another topic, and it's probably near and dear to all of you as VCs. Valuation, right? Our housing market is out of control. I live here in South Florida. Houses are going for $100,000 more than their listing price. It's crazy. I'm looking to buy a boat. It's cheaper to buy a new boat than to buy a used boat because you have to wait 3 or 4 months for a new boat, right? And people don't want to wait. They want a boat now, and so they're paying more money for used boats than brand new boats. Makes no sense. But it's this new normal. This is the new normal. It's the same thing with home improvements and everything else. It's finding its way into valuations. I've spoken to Thomas about this, and before COVID, he was already complaining about valuations 3 years ago, that he couldn't find any bargains. But as VCs, what do you do here? It's the cost of playing the game. Chensey, Andy, you guys are more in seed. Thomas, like Insight, writes big checks, right? Cindy, you're also more early stage, but still the valuations that people are asking for are they real? Is that the new normal, or is that a bubble?
I think it's more Thomas's problem, right? So for me, Thomas has to find another person to hold the bag.
Thomas,
Hey,
what do you think?
Look, well, as we say, we don't overpay. Our management teams just miss their plan. But I think these markets have proven to be a lot larger than people sort of thought, and intuitively, and I think these companies are also just able to grow structurally faster, quicker out of the gate because of all the technology available to them. So I probably think we're trending toward this continuing. I don't think we're in a bubble at all.
I think, Alan, and I'm the relative newbie here, but as I watch from the outside, where I would worry about a bubble is if the companies were more fungible. Right? This isn't like the housing market where Thomas could sell a company back to to Chensey or to me or to Cindy. Like no, this is going in one direction at this point. So it's only a problem for us at the seed and early stage is if we start paying more in anticipation of this hope that Thomas is going to pay a lot more in 4 or 6 years when he takes over our stake. Right?
Yeah,
So
it comes down, Andy. Your seed rounds are bigger.
People are raising $25 million A rounds and $12 million seed rounds. Seed rounds to me used to be $2 million, $3 million. Was a decent seed round. Then you did an A round for $12 million.
That's chump change today.
We're certainly seeing them faster and bigger, but it's not like we're doing $100 million seed rounds yet.
Not today.
I don't know, Wiz.io.
Yeah, Andy, don't give anybody any ideas.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, the other thing is some of the ideas, especially at seed, they still have to play out. Somebody still wants to buy what they're delivering. And even in DevSecOps, developers don't like to buy anything. They don't like to pay for stuff. The public, again, I keep going back. They think everything's free and security should be free. And so it just doesn't cost anything. So there is a willingness to justify how much people are buying as compared to just buying one of everything. But again, knee-jerk reaction in this time, I think people are tending to buy one of everything and kind of seeing where that does fall out. So, the whole thing is cyclic. Everybody wants the best of breed, or they want to consolidate it and just get it from one vendor, and the cycles just keep going.
Absolutely. We've got time for one more question, if it's okay. And it's this. There's a lot of people in our audience today who are security professionals or are developers, but also are budding entrepreneurs, right? They're starting, maybe they're in stealth, or maybe they're thinking about either talking to a potential co-founder about starting something. What advice do you give them? because I'll be honest with you, most of my friends who I know who got funding, had been funded before, right? And once you've been funded once, it's generally easier going forward. Number two, the days of putting on your one good suit and walking up and down Sand Hill, knocking on doors, that's gone, right? Most people, the VCs come to you, right? Thomas has a whole bunch of smart Ivy League kids out of college who are amassing a database of every company they could find, right? And then following them. Cindy, Andy, Chensi, deal flow is so important to you guys, right? You want to be able to find these companies before the Thomases of the world, right?
No bad thing, Thomas. Just they're in there earlier, right?
No, I'm trying to find them before Chensi does. Actually, I'm not competing with Thomas.
Right, Chensi's got. Well, you got to get up pretty early in the morning, Andy. But anyway,
I got 3 time zones advantage.
That's about it.
It's never been a better time to be a founder. I really truly believe that.
Yeah.
So what advice do you give them?
What do you advise? Because I also know plenty of folks who are founders who first time founders, right? First time raising money, and are how do I go? How do I reach these people? How do I what's going to make them say yes?
So
go ahead, Chance.
Can I plug something? I just started a pre-seed founder meetup group. So Foundation Capital, myself, and Mahendra, another seed investor here in Silicon Valley, the 3 of us started a meetup group. We're going to meet every month. We have a Slack channel. And every month we're going to bring a successful founder to talk about his or her journey, founding a company, getting funds, and hiring, and all those interesting things you want to learn. And we're targeting people who are really in the seed or pre-seed stage. So if anyone in the audience is interested, please find me on LinkedIn and I will get you into that meetup group. So that's one. Secondly is as Andy said, right, there's a lot of money in the industry today, and all of us need to go out, be more proactive about meeting founders, and we're all doing it. But if you have interest of being an entrepreneur or understanding how the game is played, really just reach out to us. We don't bite. At least I don't bite. I don't know about Andy.
Only once the term sheet is signed.
Only once term sheets. Another thing I want to say is I don't have a requirement of repeat founders, and because I want to get to the underrepresented population. And the only way to do that is to remove the restriction of repeat founders and to allow those that have diverse background to rise up to the foreground. So we are looking very intently on first-time founders and finding those folks that with the right background and help them build that journey.
Yeah. Look, the fact is, I have a great panel here with 2 very, very smart, successful women. And Cindy, with the foundation you and Ron are doing, you have a similar thing. You have foundation grants for people of African American heritage and underprivileged or underrepresented, right? And this is great. This is a great thing. And people look at this panel and say, "Oh, 2 women, 2 men. What a great industry." The fact is, this isn't real. I mean, it's not the actual representation of who makes up our industry, either as cybersecurity professionals, entrepreneurs, or VCs, right? Let's be real. So we have a lot of work to do there. But it's getting better, right? It's getting better because people like you are doing what you're doing. So thank you both. I'm going to give each of you a chance to just wrap up, though, and then we'll call it a day. Who went last? Chensi, you went last when we started, so I'm going to ask you to go first.
Well, thank you for having me. And I'm looking forward to a very active cyber investment years to come, and this year, next year. And we're going to be doing a lot more, not only in straightforward investment, but working with women and non-traditional founders. And I'm looking forward to collaborating with everyone on the panel here.
Fantastic. Thanks, you, Jency. Thomas?
Yeah. Hey, so thank you again for having me. It's been fantastic. I mean, I look forward to working with all of you in the industry. I think what your final note there, Alan, I mean, it takes a commitment to diversity and inclusion from all of us. I mean, it's now baked into our term sheets, our commitment to that and to finding talent at our companies that kind of make us a bit more represented and equitable. And so it really takes continuous commitment. It's not easy. I know I'm not helping in a lot of ways, but we're doing our best. And look, I think there's just a tremendous amount of opportunity for all the cyber founders out there. So I look forward to meeting them.
Thank you, Thomas. Cindy.
So Thomas, you are helping. So that's kind of the point. And one thing I want to say is one of the things that I've learned is if you want more women to participate, don't tell them what, tell them why. Answer the why to get women interested. And when they ask more, then you can talk to the what. But our industry constantly chappers what, without answering the why. And so more of the why will help people understand they do have a responsibility, and you'll be surprised at the results and the reaction when they do want more information. So keep asking, answering the why. It's important.
Thank you. Andy, I'm going to give you the last word as the new guy. How's that?
Wow, it's very rare that a Steelers fan gives a Patriots fan the last word voluntarily, but I will absolutely take that one, Alan.
When you don't have Tom Brady anymore, Andy, we don't hate you as much.
Not yet, but we'll wait and see. And Cindy had to pull out, the Dirty Bird Cup there, so we'll acknowledge that.
No, that's the
but everybody who's come out, first of all, thank you. You're investing in yourselves, which is fantastic. Hopefully this was a great use of your time. I'm really looking forward to everything everybody here has talked about, working with you, working with each other, because our ultimate goal is all the same. We're all trying to help make the world a better place, sometimes by removing the obstacles that our industry has put in its own way. But that's what we're here to do, is make some money while we're making the world a better place. And so pay attention to all the ways that you can do that, because there are a lot of opportunities out there. There is danger, but there is also opportunity.
Absolutely. And all kidding aside, good luck to your Patriots this year, Andy. You'll need it.
Yeah, you'll need a quarterback too, so good luck there.
Anyway,
Jency, Cindy, Thomas, Andy, thank you so much for joining us on this panel. To our audience here, we have a full day of DevSecOps, DevOps Connected, RSAC, and it's part of a full week of RSAC virtual this year. So enjoy it. Thank you, and we'll speak to you soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Hey everybody, happy Thursday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with the headlines. First up on DevOps.com is an article that looks at 3 technologies that are driving business sustainability. The pandemic has highlighted many things, not least of which is the shift in consumer behavior toward further encouraging companies to change their operations and act with sustainability in mind. Technology has been a key player in helping corporations quantify and tackle environmental, social, and governance ESG issues in their sectors. A recent PwC and WEF report outlining the use of technology to drive large-scale sustainable change looked at 300 cases of emerging technology in relation to achieving global sustainable development goals. The study found that 70% of their 169 targets could be enabled by technology applications. With the link between sustainability and technology clear to see, this article outlines 3 key industry areas where technology and innovative thinking is boosting sustainability. IoT, AI, cloud deployments, and more are accelerating sustainability initiatives. And the link between meeting customer demands, fulfilling environmental goals, and greater profitability has never been closer. Technology will be a strategic business enabler to achieve all 3. And we look at the evolution of incident management. If you're an SRE, you might be so caught up in the day-to-day of work, of managing, of reliability, and responding to incidents that you never take the time to step back and reflect on the evolution of your role and your responsibilities. The way SREs think about incident response, structure incident management teams, and rank the priority of incidents owes much to the incident management strategies developed in the offline world decades ago. To understand fully what it means to be an SRE today, you have to appreciate the history of incident management and response. This article takes a look at this storied history and examines where modern incident response concepts originated. Hint, the California wildfires of the 1970s. Totally worth checking that one out. All right, in news, Code Notary has launched Code Notary Cloud, a platform that can automatically generate a software bill of materials, or SBOM, to make it easier to discover what components have been included in an application. That capability can reduce the time required to remove insecure artifacts by as much as 80% because organizations are not dependent on scanning tools to search for vulnerable components. Code Notary Cloud is based on the immutable open source ImmuDB database that cryptographically attaches an identity to each software artifact. It can scale to millions of integrity verifications per second across source codes, builds, repositories, Docker container images, and Kubernetes deployments in a way that doesn't require DevOps teams to upload data to a centralized platform. That makes it possible to notarize and verify the provenance of all the code being employed. Good stuff. All right, over on Container Journal, we have a beginner's guide to Open Policy Agent. This article was written by a co-creator of OPA, which unifies policy enforcement across the cloud-native stack. It enables developers, operations, compliance, and security teams to build and enforce consistent authorization policy at scale, enhancing security and reducing the manual burden placed on staff as a result. This article walks readers through the basics of OPA, including what it is, why it's necessary, and some best practices for getting started using OPA, not to mention some great additional resources to check out. OPA has a proven track record of helping hundreds of companies solve authorization in the cloud and is quickly becoming the standard building block for policy creation. By embracing a standard, efficient policy language, an organization can benefit from faster policy implementation, stronger application security, and time back to focus on innovation. All right, on Security Boulevard, we look at the findings from a January BlackBerry report about the Prometheus Traffic Direction System, or TDS, efforts to target U.S. infrastructure through a crimeware as a service offering. The service platform sells access to the TDS via underground forums on a subscription basis, with its prices ranging from $30 for 2 days to $250 for a month. At the same time, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency released guidance to the infrastructure and utility industry, in which it highlighted recent cyber attacks against Ukrainian public and private entities. The Deputy Secretary of Ukraine's Defense Council attributed to the attack to a cyber espionage group affiliated with the Special Services of the Republic of Belarus. On the surface, the cyber attacks were inconsequential website defacements, but when the Ukrainians dug deeper, they discovered malware designed to encrypt files. Unlike ransomware, however, there was no request for payment. The intent was solely destruction. There has been much movement in the space over the last few months, including the arrest of Ilya Sakov, the CEO of Group IB, which originally identified the Prometheus effort last August. Was Sakov's arrest a coincidence, a form of payback, or some as yet unidentified rationale, such as to prevent the revelation of a capability which was or is being used vis-a-vis Ukraine? Sakov has been charged with treason, more specifically, transferring information to foreign intelligence entities. This is a cybersecurity story with national implications, and we will continue to follow it closely. And finally, Qualys has launched a cloud-based extended detection and response service that relies on a single unified agent to streamline cybersecurity processes and workflows. The Qualys Context XDR agent software, combined with threat intelligence and third-party log data, enables IT and security professionals to thwart cyber attacks in near real time. For lighter weight platforms where deploying agent software is not feasible, Qualys makes sensors available. In contrast, previous generations of endpoint detection and response solutions are too narrowly focused on a specific type of endpoint platform, which makes securing today's expanded attack surface near impossible. At the same time, security information event management platforms only collect historical data that is not very useful when trying to thwart attacks in real time. The goal is to provide IT and security teams with the context required to correlate things such as risk posture and asset criticality as potential attacks are unfolding without overwhelming those teams with alerts that turn out to be false positives. Qualys Context XDR is based on an existing Qualys Cloud platform that processes more than 9 trillion data points generated by agents, sensors, and third-party logs. That insight makes it possible to better prioritize patching efforts, identify misconfigurations, kill processes and network connections, and quarantine hosts. All right, that's it for the headlines for today. I'll be back on Monday with a fresh new batch for you. Until then, I hope everybody has a great day, a great weekend. Please, whatever you do, stay safe.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Techstrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I am here once again with Kevin McCaffrey, who is the CEO and founder of Trident. Kevin, always a pleasure to see you. Thank you so much for coming back on Techstrong TV.
My pleasure, Charlene. It's always a pleasure to join you and to talk to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I always feel like when I'm talking to you, I kind of have to affect this Irish accent, which I'm not going to do because I don't want to. I don't want to embarrass myself. But last time you were here, we had a really, really great conversation about what you're seeing, what your organization is seeing, kind of in the space as other organizations are going through digital transformation efforts. So I kind of want to continue that conversation and just kind of take a look at what you guys are seeing in the way of the emergence of digital transformation offices. So tell me a little bit about what you mean by that. So what is a digital transformation office and what does it mean for organizations?
Yeah, it's been an interesting input we've been getting from clients and from partners that we've been talking to over the last kind of 6 months, I guess, since we last spoke. And essentially the concept of a digital transformation office is almost like taking your traditional PMO or your project or program management office and moving it up a layer. What we're seeing is that many organizations through the pandemic made a lot of short-term transformational changes to survive and to get to their customers and to service their customers. Now they have to look at things and say, well, okay, we got through that. Now we're coming out the other end. We've got a new normality. We've got to look at how we can implement longer-term strategy for transformational activities. And rather than that being done in a piecemeal or siloed perspective, we need to look at how we can look at that holistically across the organization. Okay. So it's not necessarily just a PMO on steroids. It's actually more about the strategic and actually, bringing that tactical side of activities that are ongoing and mirroring and matching that to the strategy that is also as that the organization needs to follow longer term.
Well, it kind of makes sense. And I think given our druthers, we probably would have it go the other way, where it started with the strategy and then turned into the tactical. But because of the circumstances being the way they are with the pandemic and the fact that so many organizations really had to accelerate their digital transformation kind of vision, if you will, and make it reality so quickly, it has kind of come out the way that it is. But it's great to hear that organizations are now kind of taking a more a strategic look at their digital transformation efforts and how they can kind of make it take it beyond where it is today. So are you seeing this in particular sizes of organizations, or is it pretty much running the gamut?
No, generally it's with the larger type organizations. Most definitely, you tend to see it more. The other thing, just coming back on one of the points you made about, ideally you would have gone strategic versus tactical first, and I would agree with you. But I think one of the advantages of what's happened is it's made organizations realize that they can transform and they can change, and it also moves it much further up in the agenda and in priority for the C-suite and even for the board as well. So I think that's been, if we want to get any kind of positives, that's one positive out of it. I think also what's come out of it is the fact that in the past a lot of transformation had focused in on the technology and the IT and what we're going to do, whether it's the flavor of the month with AI, blockchain, 5G, whatever is the flavor of the month, as I said. But the reality is the core components tend to be of success are the people. So if you look at the transformation and how organizations had to change, they had to move people from potentially all working in one environment to working from home, impacts on business processes. Those were massive undertakings for the organizations, and they did a lot to help and move things forward. But going forward, the concept of the Digital Transformation Office is to have that oversight at a senior level, where you're actually not just you're not dealing with just middle management, trying to implement quick fixes to do something. It's the alignment of middle management with the senior management, but also with the people that are going to be responsible for, making the organization the success. So it also has started under this umbrella of Digital Transformation Office. It can incorporate things like cybersecurity, data management, processes, methodologies, culture. So having that governance or that longer term strategy and principles that you're agreeing to, so that all of the other smaller projects that you've got underway to support your digital transformation office kind of are all singing off the same page is really important.
Well, that makes sense. And I imagine that it's an easier way for an organization to kind of align its business goals with these transformation efforts so that they can actually kind of put a P&L around it, if you will, and maximize their investment. And I think in the early days, at least of the pandemic, I think so many organizations were just focused on keeping the lights on and well, maybe not the doors open, but, you get what I'm saying. But, so, they really weren't putting a price tag on how they could actually maximize their investment in digital transformation efforts. But now we're kind of in that phase 2 or even phase 3 for some organizations. And certainly, getting the return on investment is a larger part of the conversation. So I imagine the Digital Transformation Office is tasked with that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, one of the important things about a digital transformation office is that you need to empower it with the capabilities that are necessary or required for that organization. So there isn't, like anything, there isn't just one model fits all. It has to be adopted. But you've got to look at it and say, well, actually, for this particular organization, we need to ensure that we've got this oversight and we can see and prioritize, because you're going to get organizations get different priorities, whether it's from the customer support team, whether it's from product management, whether it's from the CFO, to do different things. So from a transformational perspective, you also need to look at the priorities of those and ensuring that they all follow the same vision. Interestingly, there was an interesting article recently by Capgemini, and they came back and said that, most of the time you would have thought that top management and middle management were following the same overall vision. Excuse me. But in actual fact, that based on the surveys that they did, only 36% of the companies surveyed confirmed that they were aligned. So you have a vision at one stage and a complete disconnect with what is actually happening on the ground. So this is really an important aspect for a digital transformation office, to be able to coordinate that kind of strategy with the tactical, but also having the leadership and the capabilities within that to drive it. And also, as I said earlier, the buy-in from the employees is also key.
So who's in charge of the digital transformation office? I mean, is it the person who was running, the PM organization before, the PM office, or is it is this a new C-level title, the Chief Digital Transformation Officers, or
it can be, yeah, certainly. You do hear that Chief Digital Officer mentioned quite a lot. Mm-hmm. You've also got concepts like the Chief Ecosystem Officer. Right. So you've also got, obviously, the CIO office, but, typically a PMO is part of a project management type element within an organization. But this isn't just about the management of the project. It's got a higher level. So within that, so the person, again, who has the overall responsibility on that quite often is in the CIO type side of the organization, because usually it's technical implementations that are going to deliver the value to the business, based on their requirements. But equally, it could be somebody who's working on it purely from a strategy, Chief Strategy Officer as well. I also think that, what we've seen as well is that it does depend on the organization, so that, depending on if your vision, if your strategy is to take an ecosystem approach to partnering, to alliances and all of that, well, you need a capability within the digital transformation office of people who are experienced in that area and can drive that. While if you're more tech focused, you've got to look at that and look at standards or interoperability and other options as well. So it really depends on the organization itself. And, there's interesting examples of where this has been implemented with the FDA in the US, and actually with the I think it was the US Navy as well, have implemented digital transformation offices to consolidate and view things from one group.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And I'll be interested in seeing if this actually catches on with larger organizations and smaller organizations, because, a digital transformation knows no boundaries. And it really, it doesn't matter how big your company is. If you need to be customer centric and optimize your processes and your technologies, digital transformation is definitely what you need to consider. So do you think that this is going to be kind of a passing fad, or do you think that this Office of Digital Transformation is going to become a regular department or part of an organization?
Yeah, it's a lot of times when people think of digital transformation, they kind of may think of an end state, but it's actually a journey. So to me, it's a mindset. It's a way of you're going to work going forward. It's so to me, it isn't a fad. It's something that will continue, and it's not just for a specific period of time. I think if I was to summarize the overall vision for a digital transformation office, it'll be to enable the business to evolve and to evolve based on the circumstances that they operate in. So that could be a pandemic, it could be, a shortage of supply, it could be supply chain issues, it could be resource issues, or whatever, or change in market conditions. But your business needs to be able to evolve to that. And technology can help significantly with that. But you need to have that vision, and it's not, you just don't suddenly wake up one morning and say, "Great, we're fully transformed. If we can close down the DTO and we're ready to go."
Mm-hmm. So I wonder, actually, if the term digital transformation, I wonder if that's going to evolve over time, because to your point, digital transformation, a lot of people kind of think of it as it having an end state, but we all know that that's certainly not the case. But I think it's the word transformation that kind of maybe makes people think that way. So I wonder if even the name digital transformation is eventually going to turn into something else that's not so.
Yeah.
Maybe it's business evolution. I don't know.
Yeah, possibly. If you think back 5 or 6 years ago, it was about the digital revolution, right?
Right,
So,
yeah.
so that's now being downplayed or corrected to transformation. But I find the word digital quite, I want to say, annoying or irrelevant in many ways, because what isn't digital? What, does that imply you've got an analog transformation or a digital transformation, right?
Good point.
Right. So what isn't digital, right? But to me, I like the term business evolution. One is it's about the business. It's not about, people think of the word digital and they're thinking about tech. They're thinking about, bits and bytes. Transformation is an end state. As against evolution, you're looking at how your business is going to evolve and how it needs to be able to change to react to market circumstances and others.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't think we're going back to typewriters anytime soon. So I think I hear analog, I think of typewriters. So that's just me. But Kevin, thanks so much for having the conversation with me. As always, good stuff. You've got a lot of great insights, and I do appreciate your time and your expertise. And I can't wait to get out to Galway.
Absolutely. My pleasure, Charlene, and look forward to having you out here for, we might have a pint of the black stuff.
Hopefully one of these days we'll make it happen. But Kevin, thanks again. Hopefully we'll see you again on Techstrong TV soon.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more Techstrong TV coming up, so please stay tuned. Hey everybody, happy Thursday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I am here now with the webinars preview. You know, I always tell you, we have so many great webinars coming up on DevOps.com, Container Journal, and Security Boulevard. We've got some spectacular ones coming up early next week, so I'm letting you know about them now so you can mark your calendar and join me. The first one is called DevSecOps. It's a simple name, but it's a great topic. This one is happening Monday, February 14th at 1 p.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. Please do not make this your Valentine's Day date, folks. But this is a great webinar, totally worth checking out, even on Valentine's Day. It's an editorial panel discussion that is being moderated by Mike Bizard, and it's going to feature Scott Gerlach of Stackhawk, Natasha Gupta of Synopsys, Ron Viter of Oxeye, Ritesh Patel of Nirmata, Matt Freunhofer of X Matters, and Robert Brennan of Fairwinds. That is a brain trust to beat the band, folks. They're all going to be providing their unique perspective on the DevSecOps landscape, where we've been, where we are today, where we're going, and so much more. This is really going to be a great discussion, so I highly encourage you to check that one out. All right, the second webinar is called Google SLSA or SALSA and NIST SSDF, Emerging Software Supply Chain Security Best Practices. This one is happening Wednesday, February 16th at 1 p.m. Eastern on Security Boulevard. It is sponsored by Cycode. You know, the severity and frequency of software supply chain attacks have increased significantly. And at the behest of an executive order from the Biden administration, NIST created the NIST Secure Software Development Framework, or SSDF, with robust guidance for securing the software supply chain. At the same time, Google has released the Supply Chain Levels for Software Artifact, or SALSA, framework for ensuring software supply chain build integrity. This webinar is going to provide an introduction to the rise of software supply chain attacks and contrast NIST SSDF with Google SALSA. This is going to be very, very insightful, and one definitely you want to check it out. All right, the third webinar is called Application Security Scanning in the Repository, Best Practices. This one is happening Thursday, February 17th at 11 a.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. It is sponsored by WhiteSource. Historically, if organizations wanted to automate and enforce application security testing, the best place to do that was within the CI/CD pipeline. But as time went on, we realized that while pipeline scanning has its place in securing applications, it doesn't scale as more and more plugins are needed. And with that, the task of managing them becomes its own headache. So to get closer to being truly part of a development team's native workflow, application security needs to be in the code repository ecosystem. And this webinar will focus on why scanning in the repository is the most effective way to secure your applications and reduce your risk. from enforcing policies to providing feedback on demand and preventing context switching. Good stuff there also. All right, that's it for the webinar's preview. Please check back with me on Monday when I will have a brand new batch for you. Until then, I hope everybody has a great day, great weekend, and please, whatever you do, stay safe.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
All right, we're back. Next up, we've got The View with Vizard. This one, Mike Vizard speaks with Satya Sankaran, who is the COO of Catalogic Software. They discuss backup and recover and why it is so different in Kubernetes environments. This is a great conversation with a lot of takeaways. So let's go ahead and roll it now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Satya Sankaran, who is COO of Catalogic Software, and we are talking about data protection in cloud-native environments, especially in the land of Kubernetes. Satya, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mike, for having us.
We've been talking about Kubernetes for a while, but it's still early days, especially as we start to see more stateful applications showing up on this platform. But I'm not sure that everybody understands what makes data protection in a Kubernetes environment any different than another platform. So maybe you can walk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, look, I think in any other compute platform, storage is just a default state, right? People just assume if you're computing something, you're going to store something. But in the world of Kubernetes, I think storage in itself is an afterthought. You don't always store stuff that goes through a Kubernetes cluster. And that's perfectly understandable in terms of thought process because it wasn't really built for persistent workloads in the first place, right? But we're seeing a huge transformation in terms of digital transformation, and you're seeing a lot of people moving to the cloud ecosystem. And when you move to the cloud ecosystem, the best way to get the most out of your cloud ecosystem is to re-platform your workloads to run in microservices, and Kubernetes plays a huge role in orchestrating those containers today. But as data is moving there, we're seeing that persistent workloads is becoming a very common thing. I think in the most recent CNCF survey, we saw that I think it for the first time changed to more than half of Kubernetes users are now using it for persistent workloads. And that means you now have important and critical data sets running in Kubernetes. And our job as an essential service provider in the backup space is to follow where the data is going. And the data is going to Kubernetes, and it's our job to protect the most critical asset for any digital business out there.
When you think it through, a lot of people are saying, well, you should only put stateless apps on Kubernetes, but eventually that data's got to get stored somewhere anyway. And what's changed is there's a lot of new apps that are coming out where there is no legacy environment to store data. So there's just Kubernetes and where it's going to sit in the first place.
Yeah, two things, right? We kind of see three types of apps running on the cloud. One is the cloud native apps, which truly implies that, they were born in the cloud. And they've never been on-prem before. And all of their system of records are running in the cloud, right? And then there is the second type of app, which I consider is cloud migrated, which means that you've done a lift and shift of something that was running on-prem and now is running in the cloud, but not a whole lot of replatforming has happened. And then there is a third type of workload where I think you're seeing cloud transformed workloads, where you've now migrated it, but you're now seeing the bills come through, and you realize that the architecture of the applications you're running on cloud is not really built to make the most of the cloud. And so you're transforming them to be to be able to leverage the most out of the cloud ecosystems that you're participating in. Kubernetes is playing a huge role in that front. And the second thing I would say is when people are using Kubernetes, they're also very, very likely to be using cloud databases. I mean, your Kubernetes users aren't exactly running it on Oracle workloads, right? So they're not Exadata, they're not Oracle guys. They're trying to run NoSQL databases in RDS and so on. So I think from a backup perspective, we have to look at what Kubernetes brings in, but at the same time, it means you now have new adjacencies with respect to cloud databases, and we need to protect those as well.
As we go along, historically at least, data protection was handled usually by, a couple of people you just hired out of school. They were entry-level jobs, and it was their first job in IT. As we go forward, it feels like this is now becoming part of a larger DevOps workflow. It's becoming more programmable. So how much of this is automated within DevOps, and how much of this is going to still be somebody using a GUI to perform a task?
Yeah, great question. We do think there will be a huge shift to a new set of users that are running Kubernetes data protection, right? And I think it's because these are new set of users like DevOps engineers now being put in charge of infrastructure. These guys weren't running infrastructure in the past, but now the Kubernetes clusters in your cloud accounts are being managed by DevOps engineers. So I think there is certainly a shift in the user persona for who is doing data protection. But not all shifts are good, right? There is certainly a lot of goodness that comes from moving everything into one set of users that are, highly skilled. DevOps engineers are, not afraid of writing a script and stuff, but they don't come from the backup infrastructure world, which means you go to a DevOps engineer and ask them, hey, what is the golden rule of 3-2-1 backups? And you're more than likely to not know the answer at that point. So the way we see it, a lot of backups will be automated, but in terms of architecting your backups, a guide will be very, very useful. So a UI that allows you to define a policy and stick to an SLA. I think you will see UI is very, very useful. And also, whenever you do restores, I think you're more likely to use a UI, and you wish there is a UI rather than having to go, play around with the YAML configuration file. But we certainly think it's a hybrid world. Backups will be more and more automated with DevOps engineers in charge. But I think they all wish we have a good UI to be able to do restores when they want to do restores, as well as to set policies.
Speaking of restores, it used to be when there was a restore, we would kind of say, all right, well, it's not going to show up for about 24 hours to 36 hours. And you would just basically send everybody home and call them back in when it was done. It feels like now there's a much more of a premium on the recovery side of this equation than as much as the backup side. So how is that changing? And how much time do people need to allow for recovery? Is it almost instantaneous? Where are we?
Yeah, I think the market is very circular in this aspect, right? I think we made a lot of progress with traditional workloads where instant recovery suddenly became the default state, right? If you lost something in VMware ecosystem or virtualized ecosystem in general, you would almost always be able to bring that data up fairly quickly. I think with Kubernetes, we're taking a lot of step forward, but some things took a step back. One of them is being able to restore very quickly, right? Even today, with the world of Kubernetes, if you're trying to do a restore of a Kubernetes cluster, you needed a functional working cluster before you could do a restore to it. I mean, imagine a world where in VMware, there was no bare metal recovery. In physical servers, there's no bare metal recovery. So that's the same world we are in right now with Kubernetes. To do a restore to a new cluster, you need that cluster configured up and running, and you have to do all of that stuff up front. So I think to some extent, we're kind of back to a world where if you want to restore, you have to come back tomorrow. I'll have possibly something ready state. But that's also where I think we found a lot of opportunity in this ecosystem. And Cloud Casa, which is our backup as a service, is announcing some features this week. And these features include automatic creation of clusters during restore. So you don't need to have something up and running by the time you kick off restores. I think this allows us to bring down the RTOs during restores. And also, cloud is not a free resource. I mean, back in the day, you would always be running standby clusters to do these types of restores. But I mean, who runs standby clusters in the cloud? You're going to be paying AWS a lot of money if you are to do that. So I think there is room for the backup and recovery to be better with the Kubernetes. And we're certainly trying to make that shift by auto creation of clusters based on what was backed up, being able to spin them up on the fly without the need for standby clusters, and super excited to be bringing those into the market. But look, it's a lot of the same things we did for VMware and physical servers, but it is really good to be able to see that we're reinventing a lot of that for the world of Kubernetes, because we, again, need it, and it's time-tested need that we need to fulfill.
How automated can automated get? Are we going to start seeing AI take care of some of this for us, or what's next?
Yeah, look, I think there is going to be room for AI in terms of learning what is going on in your infrastructure. I think we probably aren't yet in a model where a lot of operations are going to be driven by AI. But time will certainly make that happen as well. But today, there's certainly room for a lot of AI and machine learning in your ecosystem. But that's more around learning what is going on and being able to make some intelligent actions. A great example, and also something that we're adding to our platform, right? First of all, we're delivering this backup as a service for you, which means that we can kind of look across multiple users what is going on in terms of what adoption is going on, what kind of clusters are being backed up, what is the size of average persistent volume, and what templates are being used for doing application-aware backups. We can kind of see all of this and actually learn and provide our customers with better service by creating pre-built templates for certain popular applications. And that's how we did pre-built application support for MongoDB, Postgres, and MySQL, because these were seen as the most commonly used databases with our Kubernetes customer. The second part of it is in security. I think AI and ML has a huge role to play in a constantly evolving threat ecosystem, right? I think in the world of Kubernetes, there are two things changing. One, I think the cyber attackers are constantly evolving their threat mechanisms. And two, I think the ecosystem itself is changing their best practices on a daily basis, right? You attend 2 KubeCon conferences, you go through the security sessions, and there is often very conflicting advice from one KubeCon to another KubeCon. So a Kubernetes admin really has an information overload and needing to track various tools that do this processing, and also the development of best practices and a constant evolution of best practices. Again, this is a world where I think AI and ML can play a huge role. We can learn across multiple customers. We can anonymize our recommendations and apply that to certain customers. And again, we're super happy to be bringing those capabilities with our security scanning features for our backup service.
Right, but I guess as we go along, what we're saying is, if we move to DevSecOps, we shouldn't just stop at the left-hand side of that equation. We need to move it all the way end-to-end and say, how are we going to kick off a backup in the event of a ransomware attack? And then how do we automate all that stuff? So it sounds like that's still early days, but that's the end goal.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think backups have always been seen as like your last line of defense. And it's the copy that you hope you never have to use, right? And people say that's backups are where the data goes to die. I think all of these are being challenged on a day-to-day basis. Backups are no longer just your active last line of defense. Backups are kind of becoming your borders. for various ecosystem, which means you need to secure it. And you need to have a more coherent strategy in terms of detecting intrusion and exfiltration and protecting your backups, because again, backups are one of the first things that are being attacked these days by cyber attackers.
And a lot of people are using tools like yours for data management as well, right? They're moving stuff up in the cloud back and forth. They already have your tool. They're like, why do I need another one? So do you think people appreciate the convergence of DevOps and data ops and how all that's coming together just for the purpose of moving data, not just for backup?
Yeah, I kind of feel that convergence is one of those things. There is no ideal convergence ever, because that means innovation is stopped, right? I think we're always in a constant pursuit of convergence, but it's also because I think innovation is also going to be a constant thing in our ecosystem. So I think, as I said, we are in the essential service provider space. Backups are a must-have. And our job is to really follow where the data is going. If that data is going into the container ecosystem, that's our job to go ahead and protect that data set. If the data is going to the NoSQL database as a service ecosystem, that's our job to go protect those workloads. So I think we're very much following the trend of where the data is going. That convergence is certainly going to be a constant pursuit as a service provider.
Okay. And then finally, there's more data protection companies than I can count. And every time that there's a new era, new ones arrive, but the old ones never seem to go away. So I think per pound in this category, there's more vendors than almost any other category I can think of. What ultimately differentiates who in this space?
Yeah, great question. It is a very sticky business, which is why I think per pound you're seeing more vendors out here in this market than in a lot of other spaces. It is a function of retention, and lots of regulations have only increased the amount of time you need to keep your data sets. So it's certainly a sticky business, and it's a great business to be in, because look, how many times have we built products that are nice to have, but backup is not one of those. Backup is certainly something that you must have in every ecosystem. But I think where you are going to see a difference between various vendors, the incumbents versus the new solution. One, I think there's a huge opportunity now with who is doing the backups. We talked about the persona of a backup user is changing. So that I think is a huge opportunity in this ecosystem for new players. So incumbent advantage is somewhat reduced when your user base is changing completely. And second, I think there is certainly a preference for everything to be delivered as a service. So what is your delivery model? If you are an established player today, guess what? You're still running agent backups. You're sending out agents. You're maintaining a backup infrastructure. You've got a backup team that cycles tapes every day. A new cloud native company doesn't have any of these assets. They don't even have a data center. They don't have a staff. All they've got is a Terraform template or an Ansible run book and a bunch of cloud accounts, right? I think we will have to shift a lot of our thinking to delivering that essential element of infrastructure as a service. And I think that's really the approach we are taking for delivering cloud native data protection. We've built products all our life, and all our we've been around in data protection for almost 20 years as a company, and we built lots of products along the way. But doing it as a service is not easy, but it is very rewarding because you get to be very close to your customers.
All right, great. Hey, Satya, thanks for being on the show.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike, for having me.
All right, back to you guys in the studio.
All right, that wraps up today's Techstrong TV broadcast. Hope you enjoyed today's conversations. There are a lot of really good ones, so if you missed any of them, please do check it out on demand. Just a quick reminder, we've got a couple events coming up, folks. We've got a few virtual events happening very, very soon. One is on February 23rd. It is the IBM Automation Insights virtual event, and that one is, I believe it's a half-day event dedicated to automation and IBM's kind of their technology and their point of view, and they have both folks from inside and outside IBM speaking about it, but it is definitely one worth checking out. After that, we have the Sneak conference. This is Know Your Code, Open Source and Supply Chain Summit. This one is happening March 1st. Again, this is a virtual event, and it is another one that is very, very topical, very relevant, and very worth checking out. We also have, coming down the pike, some live events, including a series of what we call Techstrong Live. They're roadshows, for lack of a better word, but we are going to be having them around the country throughout the year. The first one is happening, I believe, March 29th in Atlanta. It's actually going to be a 2-day event. One day is going to be dedicated to DevOps and Cloud Native. The other is going to be dedicated to cybersecurity. And we'll have that format, as I said, throughout the year in various cities across the United States. You can take a look at the lineup of cities that we have planned, as well as all of the information for our virtual events and our live events, including the InnoTech events that are going to be happening in Austin and Dallas, I believe Houston, Washington, D.C. So lots coming down on our events calendar this year. So please do check it out. Just go to techstrongevents.com. You can see the full lineup of what we have planned and get some more information, register for the events. For the virtual events, you can check out the agendas, like I said, the cities for these Techstrong Live roadshow type events, so much more. So please do check out techstrongevents.com. Check them out, register. See it all. All right, that's it for me. I will be back on Monday with a brand new Techstrong TV broadcast. Until then, I hope everybody has a great day, a great weekend. Please, if you're celebrating Valentine's Day, you're down to the wire, folks. You got to get those chocolates and roses this weekend, because Monday is Valentine's Day. And I will see you then. So have a great weekend. Please, whatever you do, stay safe.